Hey, there will be a test.
Recording in progress.
No, I use the keyboard. I need the plug. That's fine.
Hello, everyone.
Well, that's why I'm here.
So if we could grab our seats and focus. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So I am going to, I being John Oliver, City Councilor, I'm gonna get us rolling. Chair Baker will be a couple of minutes late. So we are being audio and video recorded. With me tonight in the room are councilors Albright, Wright, and Getz. We're also joined somewhere, I think, by he's still here, right?
Yeah.
Councilor Maliki just walked in. We have Councilor, well, online, we have Councilors Kalis, Princeman, Danberg, from the committee. We're also joined online by Councilor Kelly. I don't think I'm missing any, oh, and Councilor Block, thank you, right in the center there, great. Yeah, kind of holding down the center square responsibilities, so to speak, this evening. Again,
Councilor Farrell will be back.
Councilor Farrell is coming back, that's great. If I miss anybody as they join, I will do my best to keep us honest in terms of attendance. So this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. It is Monday, February the 10th, around about 7:02 p.m. I'd like to get us started with item 1525, and that is the appointment of Robert Jamfol to the Conservation Commission. I don't know if you'd like to join us at the table. Of course. As Councilor Baker kind of settles in here, I'll keep us rolling.
I appreciate that, and I very much appreciate the vice chair taking over.
That was a coup while you were out. Yeah, we'll fill you in on the details in a few minutes.
Enough of those if it is.
Yeah, right. So normally what we do is we invite you to say a few words, talk to us about what it is that interests you about this particular committee or commission. And then we'll have a few questions, and then if you're familiar with this process, which I assume you are. I'm an English teacher. You'll notice how quickly I corrected myself. And then subsequent to this evening's vote, assuming the item is approved, it'll go to the full council at the next regularly scheduled council meeting. So with that said, sir.
Well, I've lived in Newton for a long time, and I've served hither and yon and mostly on boards of the nonprofits, and I was also on 3 terms over by the Woburn Area Council with Rena. But I hadn't taken on something quite like this, and a few people I'm a greenie, I'm an environmental type, and a few people in Green Newton and the conservatives said, why don't you consider this? They're always looking for people. I said, I don't really have a whole lot of background legally in it. My wife's the lawyer. But I'm interested in it and I'm willing to learn. So I thought, all right, I'll take it on. And I'm willing to, because now that I've observed it a bunch of times, I'm impressed about it, and I'm starting to understand just exactly what it does. And I think it's important to have a responsible but objective board of people that oversee things like construction around wetlands and cities, properties, to make sure that they're what they should do, and that we preserve as much of the greenness of the world as we can. That's essentially it.
Fantastic. Do I see any hands from the committee, either in the room or online? Oh, I saw Councilor Princeman first.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. Want to say that Mr. Jamfol, as many of us know him, was a beloved teacher of many of my friends. Not me, I never had him, but I assume he was good. Okay.
Who's lucky?
Other people spoke very highly of him, but I've also followed him because he's been a very engaged member of our community for many years. I don't know if he's aware of this, but I grew up on Avalon Road, just around the corner from where you live. So was also aware of your political involvement every time campaign season rolled around. So this is to say that I have followed him. I know he was a contributor. It may have even been the Newton Graphic or the Tribune. I don't remember, but wrote many times thoughtfully and intelligently. So I would be pleased to support this nomination.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think I saw Councilor Albright. Yes?
Yes,
Great.
yes. So thank you very much for being willing to serve. Do you have any particular concerns that you want to address on the Conservation Commission, or are you just joining it to see how you can help?
No, I'm not joining it because I think, oh my God, what are they doing there? They're running Newton into the ground. No, I just want to really, since I retired, I decided I'm gonna just be a do-gooder, and particularly locally, and as the way things are going now nationally, you see, good luck having a whole lot of impact on that. So I'm very happy to be involved with things, you know, I was the founder of Friends of Newton Tennis, you know, some things I went in because I wanted to preserve tennis courts and things like that. Here I'm going in, you know, I'd like to just be a part of a process that's already very obviously, from what I can see, very well run. I just want to be a thoughtful member that responds to what comes up. And, but I don't have a particular axe to grind with it now.
Well, I want to thank you because I've seen you be active in so many different venues, and it's just nice to have you come do this work.
Well, thank you.
So I move nomination. I
Okay.
actually.
There's one more.
Oh,
candidate. We'll get there.
it's okay.
Of course, yeah, of course. Councilor Kalis.
Oh yeah, I was going to move nomination. I think that Mr. Jampol is a terrific candidate for many places. I bet he's just level-headed and sees the any issues from both sides or whatever, however many sides there are. So I'm happy to move that as well.
Councilor Baker.
Well, I wonder if I should disqualify myself because at once, his daughter worked with me and a weak moment, she helped me with a campaign, so I don't know if that's.
Nepotism, I think.
Yes. So I will, subject to ruling by the law,
Way too seriously.
but I'm certainly willing to
I
support.
had to
them.
tell her something. It was very weird that I just.
Somebody had to mute them.
But I just want to say, I'm delighted you're willing to do this. It's really great for the city and, thank you.
I agree, and I'm sorry if I could just say, Councilor Baker, if his daughter worked on your campaigns, I think it's really important that we not let his daughter's poor judgment count against his nomination.
Well, I don't know exactly how to respond to that, so.
I kid.
We'll treat that as a parens too, right there. So, and I believe we have at least one motion to approve. Councilor Getz?
Yeah, but I actually would very much concur with all of my fellow counselors, but also too, I so appreciate the discussion and the level of conversation you brought to our area council when you were on our area council. So I think of it as being, will only be additive to the Conservation Commission, and I look forward to your learning and your, you know, what you bring to the table in that group. And if you wish to stay, we're going to be discussing the amendments to the floodplain ordinance next.
Oh my God.
And so it begins.
My question is, Jennifer digests things first and then I'll find out.
Firsthand, you'll find out.
All right, well, we have a motion to approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Well, there you have it. We have a unanimous approval, and as I mentioned before, the item will be brought forward to the full city council, I believe, in 2 weeks' time, I think is correct, or is it 2 weeks and 1 day?
Is about this, not tomorrow, but the Tuesday after.
Right, so that makes it, right, 1 week and 1 day, not 2 weeks and 1 day. Great. All right, I'm batting 1,000 tonight. I'm gonna stop and hand the gavel back to Councilor Baker, so I don't
Well,
continue
I
to step
want
on
to thank
myself.
you, but my wife is waiting for me for dinner.
If you have a choice between dinner and this meeting, I would choose dinner. Anyway, thanks so much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I appreciate very much you getting us off and rolling here.
So
The next item is item 1725, requesting discussion of amendments to the floodplain ordinance. And I'll just read it into the record. Her Honor, the Mayor requesting discussion and adoption of amendments to the city's floodplain ordinance. That's section, chapter 22, section 22, in order to, one, remain in compliance with the Federal Emergency Management Agency's FEMA's National Floodplain Insurance Program, and allow residents to obtain federal flood insurance and maintain regulatory control over city designated floodplain areas. So, Ms. Steele, I assume you're going to present this along with the department, who's doing the presentation?
Me,
You, well, why don't you come,
all of me.
all right? I mean, I'm delighted to
I'm
have
gonna,
you.
you have the PowerPoint presentation.
And for the record, just identify yourself for the viewing public, and then we'll go from there.
Where does it, is that the viewing public?
Yes,
That
over
camera
there.
there, okay. So I'm Jennifer Steele, Chief Environmental Planner for the city. I'm the professional staff to the Conservation Commission. But this work with the floodplain ordinance is sort of a little bit outside of that responsibility.
We've been joined by Council, have you recognized Councilor Farrell?
I did.
Oh, good, okay. You just.
The minute I
you just
saw him,
shared, I just didn't know if you.
Well, yeah, he was in the room, left the room, came back in.
Yeah.
He tried to confuse me at first, but I persevered with help.
All right. Shall I begin?
Please.
All right, so we have a responsibility and an opportunity, and the two come together here with regard to Newton's floodplain ordinance. We currently have one, and the proposal before you is to make two. Because the current ordinance is a blending of federal regulatory authority and municipal regulatory authority. So if you would, next slide, please. The current ordinance currently addresses flood-prone areas that are associated with natural wetlands. Not necessarily areas that might suffer temporary flooding due to a clogged catch basin, for example. But it addresses areas that are directly associated with open waters, ponds, brooks, and wetlands, and of course, the Charles River. The current ordinance is implemented by the Conservation Commission, but also by ISD, the Inspectional Services Department, through their building permits. And I will note that it is all of these, well, let me come back to that. The current ordinance combines, but with very limited distinction, these two regulatory authorities, that of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and these specially designated city floodplain areas or watershed areas as they're identified in the current ordinance. Currently, residents, applicants, even staff in the ISD realm don't really understand the distinction between the federal floodplains and the city designated floodplains, because they simply sort of appear as one on our new GIS browser, and they're very unclear in the distinction if you actually read the text of the ordinance. Some of these areas are defined by elevation, feet above sea level. Some are defined as an arbitrary 30-foot swath on one side of the center line of a stream, and others are defined by reference to FEMA charts that no one knows where to find or how to get the information from. So the proposal then, next slide please, if you would, is to address the current challenges that the current ordinance provides with the opportunity that has been provided to us by the FEMA undertaking new floodplain studies and issuing new maps. When FEMA comes out with their new so-called flood insurance studies, the hydrologic studies of areas associated with streams and rivers, and creates new maps, municipalities are obligated to reference those new maps in their local bylaws in order for residents of that community to remain compliant with the National Flood Insurance Program and be able to purchase flood insurance through the FEMA program. So by remaining compliant, Newton is and has been compliant with NFIP, so-called, the National Flood Insurance Program for years. But to maintain that compliance, we must reference these new maps and the new flood insurance study, and I'll show you what all these mean or look like in a moment. We must reference these new federal maps. So this is a wonderful juncture, an opportunity to begin to actually tease out these two regulatory authorities and two distinct areas, categories, splotches on the map that are designated by FEMA under the National Flood Insurance Program, and those that are designated by the city under its ordinance authority. And if we do these two, if we do this separation and pass both of the proposed ordinances, it will allow us to maintain the exact same regulatory control that we have now over both the FEMA designated flood zones and the city designated floodplain areas. Next slide, please. So right now, we have two different regulatory authorities, and I don't expect you to be able to zoom in and really see the maps here, but these are now the two separate sets of floodplain areas shown distinctly on the two maps. On your left, you'll see the areas that are designated exclusively under the city's ordinance authority. And on the right, those areas that are designated by FEMA within the confines of the city of Newton. So FEMA has authority as, has designated these floodplain areas around and along the Charles River, along some of the major streams and water courses such as South Meadow Brook, as you see that largest blue blob in the south central part of the city, and some of the major ponds, Crystal Lake, Hammond Pond, and the like. As well as Cheesecake Brook and a number of other smaller streams. Next slide, please.
Before you.
Oh, sorry.
Excuse me. Just to clarify for the viewer, there are blue areas on the left slide that are not on the right slide. Is that
Correct.
So
Yes.
those are the, I just wanted.
Yep, so those are entirely distinct now. What you're seeing on the right-hand slide are exclusively FEMA designated floodplain areas. And on the left slide, those that are exclusively city designated floodplain areas. And they're the showing overlap.
And if I may.
Yeah.
So just for clarify, today when I was reading through the materials, are we gonna, it was unclear to me why some of the areas that the city designates are not designated by FEMA. Is that something we can talk to?
I cannot climb into the mind of a FEMA
Okay,
agent.
maybe
but-
the other way around.
But I think the short answer is that they undertake studies of the more major water courses. And in Newton, it's the Charles River, South Paul Brook and South Meadow Brook, which combine to become one, and Cheesecake Brook.
Okay. And then,
So-
so
and
the
I'm
reason the
missing one.
city adds to that is because FEMA did not study them, did not include them in their purview.
Yes, and now I can't speak to exactly, when or why the city's ordinance expanded upon the FEMA designated flood zone areas. But it was decades ago, and I'm sure you're right that it was determined that there were areas that were subject to periodic flooding or might be. And so it was quite a broad brush that was used for identifying these city designated areas only. Just about every stream course that is an open channel, because many of our streams spend much of their life underground and in culverts, has one of these 30-foot wide swaths on either side of the center stream, so it results in a 60-foot wide swath along the stream corridor. But there are also many isolated wetlands that weren't identified by FEMA as potential flood hazard areas, so-called, and are identified in the city ordinance as watershed flood, subject to flooding.
Is Willows Pond on one of these two maps?
Yes. Willows and I, Polo.
I think on the right.
I think it was taken over, yeah, I think that was recently taken over by FEMA.
Yeah.
So when FEMA redrew the maps, changes occurred. Very often when you get, reissuances, oh, we're updating our maps, and you have to look with a magnifying glass to find the changes. There was some pretty significant changes in this last iteration. That is just now becoming effective on the FEMA side. So they have, I'll say, asserted authority over a number of water bodies and expanded the floodway and expanded their reach over some wetlands that hadn't prior to this iteration been considered FEMA floodplains. But I'll show you all of those
Okay.
changes.
So recognize, but just for clarification one more time. There is a set of regulations that FEMA has, right? We have or does our city ordinance pick FEMA and ours and regulate them both together, even though the maps are different?
Okay, right now, all we're talking about, and I'd love to keep it this way just for a moment,
Yeah.
are the extents of the flood zone areas that have been identified.
Right.
Then comes the question of who is regulating those and how. Right,
Yeah, but
So-
you wait on that. if you-
yeah,
All right.
so we'll come back to those regulations, but right now, I'm simply trying to clarify that our current ordinance has a whole bunch of real estate that's covered in the ordinance, some of it defined by FEMA that we must identify as FEMA's with all the new map references and all the new map dates. And there are others that FEMA doesn't even know exist because they are only declared in the city's ordinance, and they say, we don't really care about that.
So right now,
But we will be very careful in documenting all of what we have in the ordinance and making sure that we don't lose any.
so we'll take it in two steps.
Yeah.
The first stop is which is which, and we'll talk about the regulatory process afterward.
Yes,
But on the maps first, questions, Councilor Guest and then Councilor Farrell,
Just
and then
specifically,
Councilor Wright.
I'm seeing I saw that swatch on top, but I'm also seeing the maps in the backup material, so I think
Yes.
then I can zoom in on this.
yes,
But, and this may seem random, but how much of Newton is bordered by the river?
oh, the vast majority. Of the south and west and north, there's that shared interior border with Waltham, and then of course Brighton, to
Yeah.
the east, but it's a significant.
Like over 70%, would you guesstimate?
Because it's squiggly, it's
Yeah,
a
it's
much
hard to
longer
see.
boundary,
Okay.
so yeah, I
Okay.
would say that
Well,
70 is
So
a
you
good.
would suggest that it is significant for the city.
So
The
flooding
charge,
the river.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
the squiggly part of Newton is what we're trying.
That's the official term. but-
Term.
Yes,
That's the
yes.
term, yes.
I have Councilor Farrell, then come back to Councilor Wright, if you don't mind. Councilor Farrell, do you want to come? to
Thank
the
you, Sir.
table?
Just a quick question. Is the intensity of the color on the FEMA side indicative of anything in particular? And I'm
Yes,
really interested in the whole South Meadow Brook area, which seems to be significantly highlighted on the FEMA map, but not necessarily so much on the city maps.
okay, so again, this illustration is to indicate the clear and distinct separation of a FEMA defined wetland area, which you see on the right, and the city defined wetland regulatory area, which you see on the left. So you see South Meadow Brook highlighted on the right because FEMA has asserted that that is part of its 100-year, 1% chance flood zone area. Because FEMA has sort of taken that over, I am proposing that we take it out of the city designated category, because FEMA's already done that for us. So you don't see it on the left-hand side because it's not there, right? Those two pictures have areas that are mutually exclusive. There's no overlap between that which is shaded on the left-hand map and that which is shaded on the right-hand map. Now, to your question about the intensity of the shading, each of these maps shows the different types of wetlands that are referenced within the proposed ordinance. So on the right, you have these, wonderfully obscure titles of A, E, and floodway. Those are the FEMA terms for the different types of wetlands that they define and that are regulated in different ways. So A, and I will come back to this again, A is a flood zone that does not have a base flood elevation defined. I can't get through this description without rolling my eyes, because I go, really? You're telling us that this area floods, but you're not telling us, where or how. They say, oh, ask your local professional and they'll help you figure out the flood elevation. So we're doing that in the ordinance. The AE zones are those flood prone areas where an elevation has been identified by FEMA. So they say, when that 100-year flood storm occurs, that one chance storm that has a 1% annual recurrence chance, occurs, this is exactly how high up our models indicate the water will rise, and they give you a very precise elevation of feet above sea level. 127.2 here, 137.3 over here. So all of those zones that are colored in that medium shade of blue have had an elevation identified by FEMA that is the official elevation of the 100-year floodplain. The third category is the floodway, and those are the areas that, again, have been very officially designated by FEMA, shown on a map, shown in tables. This is the high velocity channel of larger streams, and that's why you only see it on the Charles River and South Meadow Brook. I believe are the only two areas in Newton where we have that, because that's where the streams are big enough to have, during flood conditions, high velocity events that, again, are reflected in regulatory language in the state building code, or in some towns incorporated in their ordinances.
Thank you.
Sure.
Counselor Wright.
Okay, I'm just gonna do mainly the map questions now, and I have some other questions later.
Yeah, because there are a lot more slides that
Yeah.
that might help answer.
So one thing, I hate to bring politics in there, FEMA has a target on its back. What happens if FEMA goes away? And you reference maps in FEMA, and I'm worried that their website would be scrubbed. Wouldn't it be better to download and have those maps
We have them
as
all.
part of, or be able to get those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, it's a good question. They will be sending. So getting, jumping ahead a little bit here. This process was last undertaken, I want to say in 2012. So it's been 12, 13 years since FEMA last redid their maps. They came out with preliminary maps through these hydrologic studies in 2023. So all of those are what we have been regulating for the last 2.5 years. And now they have told us that those maps are being finalized with no changes to the boundaries or anything in Newton, and will become effective on July 8th of this year. And it's that date that we must have our ordinance in place by referencing those new maps with the July 8th date in order to remain compliant. I have downloaded all of the preliminary maps. As I say, we've been regulating based on them for years. They're reflected on our GIS browser that's available to the public. Really, the only thing that is going to change is that there will be a new date in the lower right-hand corner of the maps, and they will make those available to us in hard copy, but also downloadable.
Okay, thank you. And then you said the city maps, there were some errors, but reading through this, it sounds like it didn't affect any lots. It's more cleanup. You said were made minor map changes were made to correct errors.
Yeah, and I'll go through all of those,
Okay.
every single one. I'll show you in the tables. Yeah.
And then one of the things in the tables, a question on is, sorry. Page. Is, what do you say, newly FEMA, so these are the new ones that they added in?
Correct,
Okay.
the places that they have now incorporated on their maps in their stream profiles and require municipalities to reference as FEMA regulatory areas. They didn't add any wholesale, any new areas that weren't already reflected in some way on our maps, but actually that's not true. The ponds were brand new.
So
Yeah.
So overall, and later in your slide, you said, you know, some areas remain unchanged, some areas expanded, some areas shrank. Some new areas were added. This is on the FEMA. Overall, from the old flood zone maps versus the new ones, what's the delta of properties involved or, you know, called out in a flood zone?
You mean
And
how many?
how
I
many?
can't tell you that off the top of my head,
Okay.
and it would be. I would have to use Doug Greenfield's GIS magic to overlay
Yeah.
the areas of change.
Do you think though it's a handful or it could be hundreds?
It's. It's limited areas, so there were two types of change, because there were two directions of change. There were areas where flood zones expanded on. And again, this is what has been mapped, so the ground didn't change, the flood conditions
Yeah.
didn't suddenly change, it's just what is FEMA asserting is subject to the 100-year flood elevation. Some of those areas expanded, and on the maps of change, those are all shown in conveniently in black, opaque, so you can't actually see what was under them. And on the map changes, the areas that have been removed from prior identification as being within a 100-year flood zone are shown in green. So I could ask Doug Greenfield to try to do an overlay and identify the exact number of parcels.
Okay.
I don't have that number off the top of
Well,
my head.
knowing that, I think what would be important is a letter going out to these people. You know, oh, now you're in a 100-year floodplain and they weren't before, or someone
yeah.
who's been taken off, you know, to notice that, because that'll affect what they need for insurance.
Exactly, yeah. So, so certainly, the insurance, so people who hold mortgages and whose banks obligate them to have flood insurance, or homeowners who wish to take on flood insurance on their own is the subject population. And certainly the insurance companies are being proactive and reaching out to people.
But I wouldn't trust like every single
Right,
insurance
right.
company and stuff, so
Yeah.
having a letter, a
Yeah,
form letter
yeah.
saying, you know, our 100-year-old floodplain maps have been updated and your property is now part of it, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah,
Okay, again, we want to just clarify the map
Yes.
questions and then go on to the regulatory part. Counselor, all right.
So I think it's the A area that you said they didn't give us a flood elevation.
right, what they provided was a blob on the map, as you know, exactly as you see there. And so, and I'll get into this as I move through my slides, using the very accurate 1-foot LiDAR topography that we have, which is the same data layer that FEMA uses in their modeling. We were able to extrapolate what FEMA's flood elevation really should be.
For the A areas.
For the A areas, and so we have actually identified in the charts, in the draft ordinances,
Okay,
our best guess. The reason FEMA didn't do it is that they won't post a number until it has been verified through their H&H hydraulic and hydrologic modeling. So they go through a very rigorous scientific analysis of how water moves during flood events to determine the flood elevation numbers that they provide. But we used the more simplistic approach of saying, okay, if this is the same map that FEMA is using, we will interpolate this for residents and applicants alike. So that because FEMA says, if it's an A zone, ask a local public official. I'm thinking, well, that's me. I'm gonna do my homework early. And I'm gonna have the cheat sheet ready to go so that I can hand the answer to whoever comes.
so
in.
is Bullo's, I'm interested because obviously we're being pushed to fix that dam.
Yes,
So is Bullo's
Bullo's Pond is
in-
now a FEMA 100-year flood
And
zone
we
area,
have the.
and we have the elevation.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
It's in one of these charts.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So you want to carry on? Any more questions about the map? All right. Very good.
So this is the same comparison, just with the banner removed, so you can see things a little more clearly. But again, absolutely mutually exclusive data represented on the city map on the left and the FEMA map on the right. So the intention is to tease the two authorities apart. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I say, the intent is to separate these two areas to make it clear. Because it does matter for flood insurance, if it is a FEMA designated flood zone versus a city designated flood zone. It matters for building code purposes and the like. So the FEMA zone AEs, as I've identified, they are mapped areas with a flood elevation provided. And there are flood profiles that accompany that accompany and through the flood insurance study that accompany the maps that give very detailed information about the flood elevations at the 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year flood elevations. FEMA zone A's are those, as I indicated, that are mapped but without flood elevation being provided. And then the FEMA floodways, they are both mapped and identified in charts, and I will show you those in a moment. Next slide, please. So this is an example, just examples taken from the FEMA map panels, as they're called. On the left, you can see a zone A example. There's Bellows Pond, Crystal Lake, and the wetland associated with Beaconwood Street and Cold Spring Park. Those have all been taken over, I can't think of the right word, by FEMA, but have been identified as zone A's. So you can see there are no numbers associated with those bodies of water or wetland areas. Whereas on the right, there's an example of some zone AEs in the city, and you can see the squiggly lines, sort of cross sections drawn through the Charles River or through Wares Cove in this case, that have numbers. Those are the elevations in feet above sea level on the NAVD 88 datum. More on that to come, but those numbers are in a specific language, so to speak. But FEMA has identified very precisely at very precise locations what the flood elevation is. And so you can either know precisely at those cross sections or interpolate between those squiggly lines what the flood elevation is in those flood blobs. The brown areas are the 500-year flood zone, which is not something that is regulated customarily regulated by ISD or the Newton Conservation Commission. The red hatching is the floodway. And again, that's the high velocity areas that are particularly heavily regulated for structures, obviously to ensure the safety of the structure, but also to ensure the easy through flow of the water during flood conditions.
What's the yellow?
The sort of brownish?
The yellow, right?
The
through
yellow.
middle, through some of that.
Oh, that's the municipal boundaries.
Oh, okay.
Yep, sorry, I wasn't
Okay.
seeing that at first. Yeah. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so in the cities, in the current cities ordinance, there's some pretty confusing nomenclature being used. There are 5 categories of wetland areas that are identified in the floodplain ordinance. With very long names like open brooks and streams and their tributaries, watershed, brook or stream. And then you get a listing underneath those, or wetlands / watershed. Names that really didn't mean much to me. So another objective of mine is to simplify the nomenclature. One is to make sure that anything that has been assumed by FEMA to be within their jurisdiction, we're using their nomenclature only. And that those that we're reserving for city jurisdiction and under city's authority are very simply called brooks. That's what we're talking about. Wetlands associated with brooks, isolated wetlands, or ponds and their associated wetlands. So that's my proposed nomenclature on the right there in bold. Next slide, please. And another objective is to provide maps. The current ordinance is simply text. I have a copy of it here, and I think it's in your documents as well. It is just pages of words and listings of elevations for each wetland area. And I think that maps say 1,000 words, and I think it's really helps not only the applicants, but also city staff in their implementation of this, if maps are provided.
Excuse me a second, just to clarify, if the map and the words for some reason conflict, you have a rule of construction about which controls?
Well, so,
I know the intent is not to
Yeah.
have them conflict, they have to match up,
Right,
but
right.
if somebody ever gets in a.
it's a good question. I believe what we have said is that maps are being provided. Let's see, the elevations are extrapolations, and in the case of conflict, elevations from the FEMA information will be used. It's a good question about the city.
I think the reason I'm
Yeah.
asking my memory, and again, Ms. may correct me, is that if we have a conflict between our zoning map and the zoning text, the
Yep.
text controls. But it's just, again, I don't want to slow down your process here, but it's one of
Yeah.
those things that
Yes,
is worth keeping in mind so that everybody has the same understanding at our end of this process.
yeah, no, it's a great point. Maps and text prevails. Super. All right, next slide, please. Another objective is using a standard datum. So currently, the city's ordinance is on the City of Newton datum. And so the numbers that reflect the flood elevation, the level on the landscape to which the flood waters are anticipated to rise, are being identified, are being spoken in a language that no one else speaks except people in Newton. And so if you are a new resident to Newton, or if you are a consultant who was used to doing business anywhere outside of the city of Newton, and you look at the current ordinance, you think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my numbers? Nothing is working out here. You soon come to realize that it's because the language of the current ordinance is in a unique language. And I believe if you go to the next slide, yes. So all of these, as I say, these are numbers that identify how high up what flood waters will rise, and that is how high on the landscape will they be, and that another way of saying that is how far above sea level will they be. So if you have a house, as shown on the right there, and it is sitting on the ground, but it's within a flood zone, and so the flood waters are anticipated to rise up, let's say, to the bottom of the windows there. That flood elevation could have 3 different monikers or numbers associated with it. If it were on the City of Newton base, it might, for example, be 105.72 feet above sea level. But that is exactly the same number, the same level as would be described on what everyone else in North America is now using, this NAVD 88, North American Vertical Datum from 1988. If that same level would be described as being 100 feet above sea level. Why? Because the City of Newton base and the NAVD 88 base are just different places on the vertical plane. They've each defined sea level differently. So their zero, or their starting point, is different.
So you're gonna try and have one common language.
So we're going to try to use the language that everyone else uses across the country, and which FEMA uses for all of their numbers and it's on all of their maps, so that you can compare apples to apples. Yeah.
How is sea level different?
I'm gonna say, shouldn't we know, but my question actually has to, does that change all of the references that we see in every single land use document, ZAP document, when we're talking about a change of grade, for example? Or is this just for water levels?
So it is for absolutely every grade of everything. I can't tell you how, what the most common language that plans that you see come in. Every plan should identify the datum that it is using. It's, you know, you wouldn't have to say it, but it's just, it would be saying, this manuscript is written in Spanish, this manuscript is written in English, this manuscript is written in German. You know, it's a little more obvious when you are in fact using entirely different languages, but it should be.
You know,
So which one do we use?
So
Honestly, though, for your review, it doesn't matter. As long as they're using one, because what
Right.
you're most interested in is the differences in grade, the delta, so the changes across the site. So it doesn't really matter which one is being
Right.
used.
Which,
Yeah.
as long as we, right? Are sure that we're in the same language.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the history, and this might clarify a little bit
I'm
about what you're,
afraid
about
of
what you're
what,
seeing.
I'm afraid of the
So-
Pandora's box, I just.
Yeah. So the city of Newton base is what the so-called tie cards and all of the old city records are on. So if you go into the archives down in engineering and you pull out a little index card or an old plan, it is most likely gonna be on city of Newton base. But with all of the modern surveying instrumentation and the diversity of teams that are being put together to create plans nowadays in Newton, the most common go-to datum is NAVD88 by far. The only people who would have any wish to maintain City of Newton base are the folks in engineering, because they're gonna actually have to do some conversion if they're going back and looking at historic records. In my meetings with them, I said, I hear you, I understand, but it's just you. Please give on this one. And they said, okay.
Okay. Very on. We want to go-
Yeah. Right, okay, yeah,
that's
so
good.
if you can just go back for just a moment, yeah, so the grades don't change. We're talking about reality on the ground, whether it's ground elevation or flood elevation, it's just the labels. And so I want to just bring this, our new ordinance, it's an opportunity to bring it into the 21st century in terms of the language. Next, please.
NG stands for what?
Um,
NGVD.
National Geodetic Vertical Datum National.
And who uses that? So we don't use
That
it?
was the old one that everyone used to use. That was the national one. And then the North American Vertical Datum was the update. And so the first one was in 1929. NAVD 88 came in 1988. And you know, with all new, it's like all new technologies. Everyone went from, you know, 8 tracks to to cassettes to CDs. Everyone went from NGVD 29 to NAVD 88, except Newton.
Yeah, I don't understand how sea level changes though.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you know, the real question is, you know, how are you measuring average sea level for the nation?
And that
It's-
and that
it's
may
a-
change too. So-
Yeah, right, right.
Notwithstanding.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
so does that change as our sea level rises? Does
These
this
are-
never change?
These are all just numbers. They're all just labels. It's all relative to things that really aren't changing, like the elevation of the ground. Your house is sitting on the ground and it's not.
But it moves. I mean, the earth moves and things
It
move,
does,
so
it
especially
does.
like California, that moves a lot
Yeah.
more and stuff.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be working in such a dynamic environment. But for right now, you know, the assumption is that our land is fairly stable.
Okay, carry on.
Next, please. All right, and then there are a few corrections in elevation. There are a few locations in our ordinance where the elevations just don't make sense. This is how the current ordinance is. And I'll go through and show you the ones that with a lot of careful vetting have been identified as needing just minor corrections or.
Is one of those Clinton Street?
So.
This is inside.
Next-
Yeah,
Next-
inside baseball stuff, yeah.
Next
Who's
month.
letting that guy talk?
Okay, so, sort of in summary, what we've talked about, the proposed ordinance has maps, it uses the current, NABD 88 datum. It corrects some elevations based on this LiDAR topo, oh goodness, I should know, anyway, it's. Airplane flies over, electromagnetic spectrum is used to reflect off the earth. And we're getting very, very detailed 1 foot topography generated from these flyovers. And so we have now really detailed topographic maps of the entire city of Newton. And FEMA also has this data. And so it's nice that they are finally mapping their flood areas on the same topographic maps as Newton is, because as water rises, it remains level. And so it is always going to rise up, even with the shape of the contours of the land that's holding that water back. And so using those lines of topography, we can identify very clearly and distinctly what areas are prone to flooding. So in the materials that you have, there is a bunch of red ink as shown here. And what you'll see in black is the final proposed elevation for each wetland area within the city ordinance. The current ordinance's elevation, which I have translated because it's all in the current ordinance, it's on the city of Newton base. So I had to translate it to NABD 88. So the second column there, the first red column on the left, the current ordinance NABD 88 elevations are provided. I've then shown you the change between those two, between the proposed elevation and the current elevation. And I've indicated in the notes column why that change occurred. Many of these areas, because they're really low and really shallowly graded areas, these flood zones, the elevations provided in the existing city ordinance is actually, when you map it out on areas that aren't even contiguous, they're little isolated puddles, so to speak. And you actually have to bring up the flood elevation, in some cases 1/2 foot, as here at the eastern tributary, the Hammond Brook. It had to be elevated 1/2 foot because there wasn't even a flood zone. There were just little pockets of puddles at the originally identified 167 elevation. At the originally identified 166 elevation. So we elevated it 1/2 foot so that we now have one contiguous flood area that will flood up 6 inches.
Flat up 6 inches.
During the 100-year storm, if that is what these areas in the city ordinance are defining, you would have 6 inches of standing water. Because that's where the 6 inches above the original grade as identified in the ordinance. So I'll show you in maps and it will be much clearer. There was another correction that was made. The second line there, South Meadow Brook Upper, and the third line, South Meadow Brook Lower. In the original ordinance, there was one single entry that referenced this South Meadow Brook flowing through Kennard Conservation Area. And it was one elevation, 139.5. Well, South Meadow Brook, as it flows through Kennard Conservation Area, goes through a significant grade change. There's a wetland that's way up high. Then there's a rambling stream, and there's a wetland that's considerably lower. And it just made no sense to define a flood area. And you're asking here, which one rules? Is it the numbers on the chart, or is it the map? Well, if you just looked at the numbers on the chart, you would have drawn this one huge flood area over all of Kennard, when it's really functionally 2 different wetland areas connected by a stream at 2 very different elevations. So that's another correction that was made here. I've created a new sub area defined for greater accuracy that reflects the upstream higher elevation portion of South Meadow Brook, and the lower portion of South Meadowbrook. So changes there.
Carry on where, at least I am full of admiration for your diligence.
Next slide,
So-
please. Okay,
Yeah.
this has
I mean-
been, yes, thank you for recognizing that. Okay, so why change now? FEMA's got its new maps. We have to adopt them by July 8th. We've got these new floodplain lines and elevations. We've got the new flood profiles. I'll show you what those look like in just a moment. And we are required to make the change to the FEMA section. And I don't want to widow or leave, hanging out as it currently is with this awkward overlap than our existing ordinance. Next slide, please. Okay, so FEMA map changes. You were asking about what was removed and what was added. Here's an example. The green splotches. I've just put a pointer to one of them. That's an area that was removed from the 100-year floodplain based on FEMA's new models. And mapping. The area in black, those are areas that have been added to the 100-year floodplain. In many of these areas of change, there aren't houses, there aren't buildings. These occur within areas of conservation or what have you, but there certainly are areas, neighborhoods that will be affected. Over on the right-hand side, you can see the large black blob, all brand new FEMA floodplain. It's a zone A. Thank you, FEMA. No further information given, but that's the blob that FEMA drew, and we were able to discern from that the flood elevations. That's Cheesecake Brook, where it flows through the Albemarle Field, past Day Middle and Fessenden School, and on out to the Charles River. Until this map redrawing session, FEMA had only assumed authority over that the very end point, the last most northerly portion, thank you, of Cheesecake Brook that's shaded in blue there. All the rest of that black is brand new FEMA flood zone. All right, next slide, please.
But some of this floods like every 2 years. I mean, it's not a 100-year flood zone right along Albemarle by the pool and stuff.
Well, but if you look at the extent, I mean, you're absolutely right. Cheesecake Brook floods routinely, but not to
this
that,
flood.
but not to that
Okay,
extent.
that far out,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
This is the big flood. not-
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Next slide.
Basically, the entirety of Bellevue.
Yeah.
So carry on.
Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so I keep talking about these FEMA flood profiles. Here's a picture of one. They're charts that show the substrate, the bottommost line there angling down into the left, that's the substrate under, in this case, Cheesecake Brook. And then the lines above it are the elevations, the flood elevations that FEMA has defined for the different flood occurrences. The highest, tallest, most upward line is the 500-year flood. What we regulate and what the building inspectors regulate is the 100-year flood. So that's the next line down, the dashed line. And you can see all the culverts identified, road crossings identified, and so on. This is the actual data from the models that FEMA has run. This is the gold standard. So when you really want to know very precisely what is the flood elevation along any stream reach in Newton, these are the charts that you have to go to. These charts are also not easy to find. And so that's another reason to provide in the ordinances the information, extract the information from these charts and provide it to residents and applicants so that it's easy to understand. Next slide, please. Okay, as I've said, this is all coming about through a mandate from FEMA. They have identified, there's a letter on the right there, a screenshot that going to the mayor, indicating on January 8th, that was when the clock started. They're saying you've got until July 8th to adopt the maps that we haven't quite yet provided you, because we're still doing our final QA/QC. But you will have to approve them and incorporate them in your new ordinance by July 8th in order to remain compliant. They've also, in addition to making that declaration, they have provided through their partnership with DCR a Massachusetts model floodplain bylaw, or in our case, ordinance, with very specific language, very specific sections. And they are the authority, this DCR liaison is the authority through whom we have been providing drafts of the FEMA ordinance. And we have received preliminary approval from him saying, yes, your draft satisfies our requirements. I just got my final email from him. We had to add one section in one sentence, I'm sorry, about enforcement, and he gave it the final thumbs up. So we are good to go, but we are obligated to use their language and their organizational scheme. Not one to kowtow precisely to these things. I have reorganized it a bit so that it matches a little bit more what the city had and makes a little bit more sense to my brain. But the organizational scheme that I've provided to you meets their requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've talked a lot about this. Why 2 ordinances? Because of the categories of wetlands, because of the time requirement. I'm suggesting that we tease the 2 out and immediately and simultaneously approve both ordinances so that we neither are widowing the existing city designated flood areas, nor allowing to remain awkward overlap of the existing city ordinance with the new FEMA required ordinance. Next slide, please. So a lot of time has gone into this, and a lot of brains and eyes and ears have lent their expertise to this. We've worked with the mayor and Jonathan Yo with engineering and with law. And I've worked extensively with Doug Greenfield to go over the maps and the topography, and Frank Nichols has been my vetter of just double and triple checking all of the numbers and all of the maps. Next slide, please. So the proposed ordinances, the FEMA ordinance has the required language from the model bylaw. It has the accurate elevations based on the FEMA maps and the flood profiles, and it provides for the users maps and tables to be more user-friendly. The city ordinance, as I say, has made as few changes as possible, with those exceptions identified here. The elevations have been ensure that each flood area is a contiguous area of topography. We have eliminated 2 intermittent brooks. I'll show you these because they were simply low areas or channels within a flood zone.
They're intermittent.
Well, we don't eliminate intermittent streams, but these ones were they had no life of their own. And you'll see in a moment. As I noted, I modified the typo there, Kennard wetland. That should not say Kessler. It's the Kennard Conservation Area wetland, where I split it into 2 sections based on elevation. And the Cabot Street Meadow is another one, and I want to show you that in detail because that's the other one that does have implications for housing and needed significant modification. Otherwise, all the elevations are based on our accurate LiDAR topography. They've been converted to the NAVD 88 datum, and they are all replicated in maps and tables. Next slide. Okay, so here's the FEMA ordinance, just a couple of examples, exactly the same notes here that the red ink is just for your understanding. It would be eliminated in the final version of the ordinance, but it indicates the change or the delta in the numbers that are now identified in NAVD 88 language. In the stream reaches that FEMA regulates, they tell you're talking about a section of a stream that's flowing down gradient, and so you have an upstream of that segment. You've got an up gradient elevation and a down gradient elevation, and so in the portion of, in this case, the Charles River, for example, that starts at the Newton Street Roxbury line and then flows from there to the Kendrick Street Bridge, the water level drops from 90.2 down to 89.9. And if you're anywhere in between the 2 terminuses, you would need to extrapolate to know the exact flood elevation. but at least we're providing the reader with information that gives them very precise land-based landmarks, and as precise as possible, the elevations based on the flood profiles. And then you can see on the right, the changes that are represented based on from the change from these numbers that were in the old ordinance to the new ordinance, and those are based on the changes that FEMA made to the flood profiles and the maps. So those are not made up. You know, those aren't changes that I thought were a good idea to make. Those are changes that FEMA thought were appropriate.
So Jen, tell us a little bit where we are in the process of your slide.
We're closing in on it.
All right.
Slide 21 of 27. If you just go back for just a moment, please. There are these FEMA flood zone A's, as I indicated, that were not, where we were not given numbers by FEMA. And so those, as I've said in the notes column on the right, these are newly FEMA, and we just had to use the number based on the topography of the FEMA blob as it showed up on the map. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Within the city ordinance, as indicated, there have been some changes for accuracy. This here is South Meadow Brook, and you can see two sections of wetland here connected by a narrow strip of the South Meadow Brook stream course itself. And the changes that have been identified on the screen there were again reflections of the really nicely accurate LiDAR topography. And you can see really quite moderate minor changes, 1/10 of a foot or 6/10 of a foot. Okay, next slide, please. This is the example of the the two changes in the elimination of intermittent streams. In these large flood areas, on the left, Dolan Conservation Area, and on the right, the Cranberry Wetland, there are tiny segments of so-called intermittent streams identified on the maps that had their own 30-foot wide swaths defined along either side of the center line in our ordinance. Well, those areas were already incorporated within the larger flood blobs, also identified in the ordinance. And so I just thought it was much simpler to have a single flood area. And so I proposed the elimination of those arbitrary 30-foot wide swaths in these two locations. Next slide, please. This is an example of one of those areas where if we were to use the existing elevation provided in the city ordinance, we would have little tiny isolated islands or puddles. So on the left, you can see where the 1 foot, based on the 1 foot LiDAR topography, the elevation of the flood area in the wetland called Skunk Hollow. There would be 3 little puddles shown with the green arrows.
Red arrows.
I'm sorry, with the red arrows, thank you. But if that area really is a flood zone, as indicated on the original maps that accompanied the original city ordinance, the area is more akin to what's shown on the right there, raising by virtue of raising up the flood elevation 1 foot, you actually have a contiguous flooded area. And so my proposal in this ordinance rewrite is to elevate that one entry by 1 foot so that we have a single contiguous flood area.
But the net effect of this, just to be clear, is that if you're in that flood area, and this is not a FEMA flood area,
Right.
Describing it, our ordinance would now apply rather than being a point on the map, right?
Right. So, well, the old ordinance didn't have maps. Remember?
No,
It just indicated elevations. Or I should say, we didn't publicize maps. And so those flood elevations didn't correspond with the original old maps. And so there was this disconnect.
Yeah, but now you can know what your
Yes,
scope of your responsibilities are. That's the basic point here. You
Yes.
couldn't very easily before. You had to be an engineer really to figure it out.
right. Yes, yep. Next.
Friends with it.
Yeah, next slide, please. This is the change in the sub area in the, again, I've mislabeled it, I get my K's confused, Kennard Conservation Area, South Meadow Brook. You can see on the right-hand side, that's the up gradient, higher elevation wetland. connected by a stream that crosses many lines of topography as it babbles downhill to a lower sprawling wetland shown on the left side of the screen there. I've identified both of those ponding wetland areas with their own individual elevations. And then the stream retains its 30-foot wide swath as it always had before. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, the area with the largest change in the city elevation identification was called Cabot Street Meadow. That's Cabot Street on the north and Winchester Street, Westchester.
Winchester, there
Win-
is a Winchester.
Winchester,
and there's
Winchester.
a Westchester.
I think this is Westchester because Winchester is down south.
Yeah.
This is,
So,
yeah, so I think this is Westchester. And there's a low-lying area that's shown in the shaded area. So the shaded area is the best approximation using our LiDAR topography of the original city ordinance flood map. But the city ordinance contour was identified as being sorry, the city ordinance had a map and it was basically this largest purple blob there. But that purple blob, if you can see on the right hand side of the screen, it is contiguous with the 77-foot elevation contour. It then crosses over at the 76 and the 75 and the 74 and the 73 and the 72. And so you have a blob of water, an area of water, a bowl of water that's supposedly rising up during a flood condition. But it's apparently, according to the current city ordinance, maintaining a tip, an angle like this, because it's supposedly 77 feet high on the right-hand side of the screen to the east there, but it's only filling up to about 72 down on the west. It makes no sense. And yet, if you do take the elevation in the ordinance, which I believe was 78 feet, and projected that 78-foot contour, you would have flooded half of northern Newton, because 78 feet is, that contour covers so much of that area. So my proposal is based on current information about what actually floods back there, from input from the engineering department, is that the flood zone be defined as 73.5 feet in the east, that red mitten, lobster claw, in the east, and it's a slightly lower elevation of 72.5 feet in the western portion. That would reflect water that does not break out across Cabot Street, doesn't rise up that shared driveway between those two homes and break out onto Cabot Street. But it does reflect known flooding in the eastern portion of the bowl that comes up to about 73.5. So that's my proposal for the fix of Cabot Street, which currently is just illogical the way it's identified in the current ordinance.
That's not Cabot Woods, is it? Is that?
No,
Edmonds Park?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, so, all right, and then, next slide, please. So, and I believe that, yeah, this is the last one. So, in terms of, getting to, into compliance with FEMA, we have to approve the federal, FEMA ordinance using their language, their, layout, their organizational scheme and their language as has been presented to you and has been preliminarily approved by them, in order to not lose the authority that we currently have over city designated floodplain areas and or to avoid an awkward overlap by maintaining the existing ordinance in its full form. I'm proposing this clear, clean separation between FEMA and city jurisdiction.
Wow.
This is I can't say it's a labor of love, but it's to be around so much damp
Yeah.
stuff for so long, and then surprised you haven't brushed it, but never mind.
Right,
Um,
and you should all have received sort of a clean copy of the proposed. Of the proposed versions of both with a little bit of red ink in it, just, notes of clarification, so. I hope you have those and,
Recognize
Yeah.
Counselor.
Questions?
Wright first and then Counselor Wright. And do we have any hands up? No, not yet.
Okay, so one of the,
not to sleep.
sorry. So, I mean, chasing this, so going back like 2017, Harvey flooded, and it was beyond the 100-year floodplains and things, and they said they weren't there, but weren't updated, but you said the maps were updated in 2018?
No, the so-called preliminary maps, the earliest draft versions of what we're being asked to adopt now came out in 2023.
Okay. Anyways, in one of I'm reading the ordinance, and in one paragraph, it says, all construction of residential structures shall have the lowest floor, including the basement, at or above the pertinent flood elevation. So like one of our projects that are going on Dunstan East, which is on Cheesecake Brook, they have 2 floors below for parking, and it's below the water table. And so they're moving out the water table and they're raising the water table in the neighborhood. So would this ordinance not allow them to do that?
So. First, I'm not a building inspector, and that language is directly reflective of the building code. My understanding is that garages are separate and distinct from the first floor definition. But quote me on none of that. The other thing that I do want to distinguish though is surface flooding and groundwater. They are, they share, they're related, but they're really very distinct. So this ordinance, the existing ordinance, the proposed ordinance, it's all trying to address surface flooding, where water will pond up above the land surface where it doesn't ordinarily reside. So it's temporary inundation from an associated water body, whether that water body be a pond or a stream or a river. It's temporary inundation above the ground surface. Groundwater, obviously related, there are hydrologic connections, but really a very different beast and not addressed in these ordinances at all.
Okay, so the flood elevation, so here, all construction of residential structures shall have the lowest floor, including the basement, at or above the pertinent flood elevation.
Right, so the building code says that you must elevate your first floor above the so-called base flood elevation by 1 foot. And that base flood elevation is the 100-year floodplain elevation. So you're not.
This is the basement too. right?
Yeah, this is
Yep.
the basement, yeah.
Yep,
Has to be above the 100-year,
yeah.
which
and
I
so
would
that-
think, some of these houses are close to being in flood zones and all this other stuff. I
Yeah,
would think a
so,
lot of places aren't, following this.
well, this is, so this is for new construction.
Yeah.
And, right, and so the first floor, so a basement is allowed, and I should not be getting into this because I'm gonna misquote it. But basements that are not finished and designed only for storage, and FEMA uses an example of, like for snow tires and other things. You are allowed to have below the base flood elevation, but the
Living space.
living space, and I think it's defined as first floor and has to be elevated, not only at, but above, elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation.
Okay.
But this isn't retroactive to say that anyone whose basement no longer
Yeah.
complies would have to go in and take it out.
Well, I
and make it
understand that,
unfinished,
but this is a new thing going in, and the way I was reading it, seems like it wouldn't be following this. But on part of this, it says protect and preserve the water table and groundwater recharge areas within the city. And again, protect and preserve, you know, these buildings are going in and moving the water table. So, and this is a new building, it's not done, there's just starting on, I think, on the lower level. I don't understand how, and that was in there before, how we're allowing these things, or maybe I should go to ISD to explain this.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and I don't know, you know, I can't assert that the installation of a.
This is the
below grade-
argument that if you push the bathtub into the, or push the boat into the bathtub, the bathwater rises, you know.
Right, except-
But the argument is that it doesn't really rise because, never mind. but-
Well, they're saying,
Because
with
it's a
Dunstan,
porous bathtub.
Yeah,
Dunstan East is going to raise the water table. They have, we've been on meetings where they said it will raise the water table in the neighborhood. And, you know, I worry a little bit about it. Oh, it's only a few inches, but still, how sure are they on that? And then also here, it says regulate development. So, the purpose here is barely, the floodplain district, the purpose of which is to regulate development in and around natural resource areas subject to flooding. So it's regulating the development. What do you mean by regulating the development?
Yeah, and this is now going back to the question that you asked in the very beginning. So the Newton Conservation Commission, in the existing and the proposed ordinance, regulates these areas as wetland resource areas. We currently accept a single or notice of intent or application for work within either a federal or a city designated floodplain without making any distinction between the two, and we would continue to do that. Similarly, under the state building code, the folks at ISD regulate all of these same considerations under when they're going through their building permit review. Engineering, I'm assuming when they do their reviews as well, they're cognizant of these things, but I believe it's all the code in the Federal Register and Massachusetts Building Code.
Okay, that's it.
okay, Councilman.
Thank you.
Overton?
I just have to say, this is an amazing piece of work.
Thank you.
I cannot believe that, I mean, did this take, how long? Did it take months?
Yes,
I can imagine.
yeah.
I did find Willow's Pond on the chart, and it says Com Ave Center Street. Shouldn't that be Com Ave Walnut Street?
Yeah.
Because Center Street is way over there. And it doesn't say newly FEMA, so does that mean that it's been always part of the FEMA?
Let's see.
I just hope this ordinance doesn't get put on second call, so I have to try.
Well, that just cheated.
They bolt in the chamber, they have an hour-long report.
Now, for all the counselors
Is it
listening.
Yeah.
22?
Ask your questions now.
Yeah,
folks.
so.
I believe you know the answer, but just, you can
Bullo's-
just check it.
Yeah, Bullo's, I believe, was just, they just asserted.
So maybe you just need to add that
And also change the,
and change it to Walnut Street instead of
Walnut.
Center Street.
I didn't go into that detail looking at the charts.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's on
Yeah.
my radar.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
Behind.
I was just looking at,
Excuse me, we're going to Councilor Melick here.
it's something, subsection B, where watertight floodproofing of a structure is permitted. A registered professional engineer, architect certified the methods used are adequate to withstand the flood depths, pressures, and velocity if impacted. Up to forth is another factor associated with pertinent flood levels. Is there anything about how long the waterproofing should last? Because, like, to use the Dunstan East example, we were told that the waterproofing of the basement garage will be warranted for 40 years, which, as old as I am, 40 years now seems kind of.
Right. The answer is no. Because that's exactly the same language as is in the existing ordinance, and I didn't want to get into making changes. I wanted to make as few changes as absolutely necessary for accuracy. And allow another process to undertake.
Phase one of the zoning code.
I'm sorry.
Kind of like phase one of the zoning code.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
codification.
yeah.
whatever it was,
But, I wonder if that could be addressed through, conditions of special permits, for example. To immediately, if there were something, that could be- if there were a project where
And
that
I
was.
don't know how you prove that something's gonna last a certain amount of time. Anyway.
Right, yeah, I don't know, they're good questions, and I don't have the answer.
And I was curious too, is the FEMA, or the FEMA zones based, are they kind of focused on like when rivers flood as opposed to when there's, forget the word for it, when there's sort of neighborhood flooding just because there's so much water? Like the kind that's happened.
Yeah, it's the FEMA areas are, excuse me, natural. Areas associated with natural wetlands, water rising up and spilling over, so to
Okay.
speak, they're natural confines. So it's the Charles River, it's South Middlebrook, it's Paul Brook, it's it's the ponds, but it's not that low-lying area where people, forget to rake the leaves off the catch basin, or where.
Or they cut all the trees and there's too much impervious surface and nothing's getting absorbed and everything, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
Thanks.
No, sorry. So, is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilor Wright. Any discussion on the motion? Anybody online that you need to recognize? Councilor, yes.
I'm just curious, so in terms of process, has this gone to the Conservation Commission? Was it discussed within the Conservation Commission?
No,
So there's been no.
not yet.
Okay.
They will be the implementing authority,
Mhm.
but they haven't done a review or approval of it. They sort of will just receive it. It's, just as they were handed section 2222 originally, it just is the law of the land. And they are identified as one of the implementing authorities.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, anybody else?
I've got a question.
Ah.
Counselor.
Councilor Kayla.
Yeah, so this was fantastic, Ms. Steele. My one question is, did you coordinate with Josh Morse on Countryside, and was there any major changes there?
So we, the Conservation Commission has been regulating under all of these elevations and areas since June of 2023. So the
Oh, okay.
that were identified as flood elevations and mapped on the plans are these current elevations, because, the Wetlands Protection Act identifies that we have to regulate the 100-year floodplain as identified in, XDX or the preliminary more current versions thereof, and so we've been doing that now for almost 2 years.
Okay, I do remember him referencing that actually, so thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Kayla. And there'll be a quiz at the end.
One more hand.
Oh, one more hand. Who's that?
Yeah.
Then not a hand, not a hand.
It's not, it's a regular, it's not a counselor.
Oh, okay. All right. So, all those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. Thank you, Ms. Steele. And
Thank you.
and Ms. Norton, I trust that you have made sense of all this. A stunningly clear report that will produce no objection on second call.
And if not, we're not gonna be able to help you.
Right. I will try my best.
I do want to say that, Ms. Steele, I've known you and your work for a while, but this really is an exercise in diligence that is above and beyond, I think, any fair call of duty, and we appreciate it immensely. And to separate these two so that we now know what we're talking about, or these people have a sense of what they're talking about, and even the fact that you raise the puddles so that they now want at least overlap each other and become a contiguous area. It's gonna make life simpler for people, and people think government doesn't do things. This is a good case of government doing something that helps people do things better.
Thank
And they can get insurance, maybe the price is high, but they at least get insurance now because of this.
Yeah.
So, and we hope FEMA will still survive, but that's another issue.
Right.
Yeah.
we Can't control. So, thank you very much. I'm gonna suggest, folks, that we take a brief recess and maybe, the cookies available. I think we need fuel.
Yeah.
And we'll come back in about 5 minutes. All right, everybody okay with that?
And because groundwater is such a big issue, I've just reached out to a guy who has done a study on rising groundwater levels in Massachusetts, and he's gonna give a talk for us. My sort of professional organization. And so I'm about to become a lot more educated, but they were putting the model at UMass Amherst to begin this modeling groundwater levels, and they're showing graphs of Lexington and I want to say Westfield.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, which we're learning, because we're part of the Dunstan Youth group and that, is even in that area, the ground level is at different levels in that area.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I mean, it's all feeding to the stream, it's all, it goes.
Now, can I just suggest we carry on?
Oh, yes.
Apologies.
Thank you. But thank you, Mr. All right. Now, this is item 364, 369-24, requesting the mayor requesting discussion and amendments to the ADU ordinance to comply with the changes to state law, and then we have 369-24-2, requesting discussion and amendments to the ADU ordinance which are not required by state law. And what I thought I would do is ask the planning department to update us. Ms. Power, are you going to do this for us? On what changes you have made in the proposal since the last version, then we make sure we're clear on that, and then I'm gonna ask Councilor Albright to present her ideas. And then we'll go back to parking at the end.
Some of them are here.
Yeah, a few of yours are incorporated.
Quick question
Yeah.
before we start. So in here was the difference from the last proposal, which wasn't accepted. So can you give a brief overview from what our ADU rules are now versus what we have to go to? Because there's an in-between step, which is shown in here, I believe.
Well, I think, Ms. Carter may be able to do this, I think, better than I can, but my understanding is that the state statute is relatively brief, but the regulations are extensive. The regulations were draft form, they've been made final form. The law department took a look at the draft, gave us a first version, then it gave us this revised version based on the updated regs, which we have in the memo in the packet. And then Councilor Albright has hers, some of which maybe have been absorbed by some of these. So, but
my question is, where's our baseline? Like if there are the changes from the baseline.
So,
currently, right?
yeah, so I included two different red lines.
Okay.
So if you see attachment A is red line of all proposed changes from the existing ordinance.
Oh, okay,
B
yep,
is just since the last version.
okay,
So they're both in there.
okay.
Um,
That's good, then I was looking at that first part.
yeah, the first one is everything.
Yeah,
The second one is just the changes
okay,
we last provided a red line.
okay,
Just so you could focus on anything that changed since then. And the third version is a clean copy.
yeah. I was wondering why there was so many.
But I want to make sure I heard that. Attachment A is current ordinance to the new version, including the regs.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little confusing, try to include multiple versions, what you're most interested in. So a few changes since we last discussed based on the final regulations. Some things were just made a little clearer in the final regulations, and some things were a little bit different. So one is the allowable zoning districts, the prior draft regulations essentially said that we had to allow for ADU, accessory to residential use in any zoning district. They've now changed that to a more reasonable definition that is just a district where single family home is allowed by right or by special permit. So we updated that to be single residence, multi-residence, and business home group one. Previously, we had left it just at single residence because we felt there was no way the definition they had in the regulations would actually be the final one, because it didn't make any sense. Because basically anywhere that you can get a single family home by agreements, which is everywhere. So that's one change.
I'm sorry, just to clarify that part, but I thought that anywhere you can get a single family home, but not by right, not by variance, right? You just
So
said-
previously it said by variance, by right, or
yeah.
by special permit. So thankfully they took out the by variance.
Yeah. that makes sense.
So it's just by right or by special permit.
Okay,
So-
and that, but you can have a single family home in any of the districts you just described by special permit, if not by right.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I just want to be clear.
Yes. The next is, and we talked about this one last time, this was just one that we missed previously with the occupancy limitations. Whereas our current ordinance is applying the association of persons to the combined number of occupants in the principal dwelling and the ADU. So we updated that so that you're separately applying association of persons, 5 or more unrelated residents to the principal dwelling and to the ADU, but not combining the number of occupants together.
And I want to ask questions about that, but carry on and just explain.
Gross floor area, so the final regulations made a few changes to the definition of gross floor area. So we just pulled that pretty much exactly and incorporated it into this proposed ordinance. The final regulations, I think, made even more clear that we can't require any have any requirements related to materials, architecture, character, things like that, where we're not also requiring you have single family homes. So we removed those sections, and then the detached ADU setbacks. So one other change, and this is completely new in the way that they phrase the final regulations, is that we can't apply dimensional controls to the ADU that are more restrictive than those for single family dwellings or accessory buildings. So accessory buildings can have a 5-foot side and rear setback currently in our ordinance, but detached ADUs were 7.5 feet or half the principal setback, whichever was greater. So we updated this to show that the detached ADUs that otherwise meet the accessory building height are only required to provide the accessory building setback. So if they're 1.5 stories or 22 feet or less, the side or rear setbacks will be 5 feet. If they go beyond that 1.5 stories and go to the principal building height, which we also have to allow for, which we discussed last time, they need to meet the principal building setbacks. So that you can't mix and match the accessory building setback and the principal building height. You get the principal building height if you provide principal building setbacks. And if you do the accessory building height, you can use the accessory building setbacks. And those were the changes.
I have a question.
No, okay, I have a question too, but let me go to the committee first. That's all right.
So as I'm reviewing this, I'm glad about the setbacks and that's, I'm happy with that. And I'm reading, chapter 30. And in the dimensional tables, it says lot area per unit needed. Shouldn't that change or? Because ADU, is it a unit or
No,
not?
it's not considered a unit for purposes of lot area per unit.
Okay, do you want to maybe put something?
Yeah.
And explain it a little bit, like when you look at that table, because.
Right.
It may be a little, it could be clear.
Yeah, let me check. I'm pretty sure that's somewhere, but I agree, it probably could be clearer and upfront.
Right in
Yeah.
that dimensional
Yep.
table, because I personally would
Yep.
assume that an ADU is a unit. And then a couple of times, there's this invalidity clause, and it was getting kind of late and it was pretty far into this packet. I just didn't understand what exactly is that.
So this is standard, and I believe Jen Wilson is on the call as well, and may want to jump in. But this is pretty standard that if one portion of this ordinance is struck down, that the rest remains in place. And you saw it a couple of times because we had a couple different versions in here, so it's just once at the end of this section. But this is fairly standard in our zoning ordinance. Jen, am I missing anything?
What do you mean struck down? What
If
would
it's
strike it down?
invalidated by a court.
Okay,
We have a hand up, I think, besides Councilor Elbeck, Councilor, is it
Jake.
Councilor Caleb? Councilor Caleb said your light is not as illuminating as you are.
There you go. So thank you, Ms. Kyra. So on the 5.5 feet, that's statewide now?
So it's not that 5 feet is statewide, it's that you can't have a larger setback requirement than what you require for an accessory building, and we have a 5-foot setback for accessory buildings.
Interesting. So are there implications that don't come to mind for me right immediately that we should know about? Does that increase the potential number of ADUs?
Probably not.
My
Okay.
relates to that same issue.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Councilor Elbeck, you want? I
So
have a
if you
question.
have, there's a rule that if there's 2 buildings and they're 7.5 and 7.5, only one of them can be an ADU. Does this change that?
No, so that's for historic carriage houses. So there's 2 pathways in our ordinance to do a detached ADU by right. One is just as a detached ADU, the 900 square foot max. And those are the 5-foot setbacks that we're talking about, would apply there, it's 1.5 stories. The other option is if it's a historic carriage house outside of a historic district. And then it doesn't have to meet the other size requirements if you're just converting that historic structure into an ADU. That has the provision of the 15-foot. So the state law doesn't speak to that section at all.
Okay.
We're allowing a 900 square foot detached ADU by right, which is what the state law requires. It doesn't require us to go beyond that for the conversion of historic carriage houses.
Okay.
You know, that's something we're already doing, which I think is a good thing in order to try and preserve those buildings. And we could amend, which I believe is one of yours, to remove that 15-foot. It's just sort of separate.
Okay,
And
so the
unrelated
5-foot
from this
thing
case.
doesn't affect that at all. Okay.
Now, is it open to us if we're uneasy about the 5 feet? We could change the 5 feet for accessory structures, right? And just everything would be the same. We wouldn't violate the state law. We're just saying, okay, accessory structure should be 7.5 feet, and then the accessory building ADU would be 7.5, right?
I believe so.
yeah.
I mean, now that's not part of the current draft, but I just want to highlight that because I think people have expressed some concern about setbacks. That would be open to us. Now, if it's a non-conforming building, that's a different story, but at least going forward, we could make that modification. Now, could we make that modification here now?
That would be a question for the law.
One
Miss
of-
Wilson is on
Ms.
there.
Wilson, maybe you don't have to answer that right away, but maybe you can.
No, we'll take that under advisement and we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, because I think that part of the, the change that the state has made these much closer to the lot line than we had expected them to be. And if there's a way to preserve the old setbacks, then we might want to do that.
Our ordinance had it at 5 feet.
No, it
We-
has 7.5
No, for the
No, 5
ADU.
feet.
for ADU.
5 feet.
ADU.
Yeah, but yeah.
Wasn't that by special permit though?
So
No.
there's a waiver by special permit. When this was last updated to allow detached ADUs by right. We had also put forth a proposal to match the accessory building setbacks for those as well, which was 5 feet.
But
That
that
did
didn't,
not.
that didn't pass.
No, that did not pass.
So, anyway, we should just keep that in mind, but, so those are the modifications that are, as your judgment, required by the state law. Okay, everybody clear on that? Anybody have any questions about this section?
Just one quick
yeah.
follow-up, if I may.
Yeah.
So going back to the question that Councilor Wright just asked. Is an invalidity clause the same as a severability clause? Because isn't that's the term I'm used to. Is severability, not invalidity.
Well, there's the sanity clause.
Yeah, that's kind of used against me at all times, so, that one I'm also familiar with.
I would defer to Ms. Wilson, we didn't change that, that's what's in the
No,
existing.
understood.
Yeah, that's what's in the existing ordinance, but I would defer to Ms. Wilson.
No, I'm sorry. Oh,
That's right, it's not right.
well, it's in the ordinance, but let's leave it alone and not.
Yeah, fair enough.
Counselor Getz.
I didn't know if it was, that's
No.
all of the stuff. Okay, so I had a really good discussion this afternoon with the law department, and they clarified a lot of what my questions were about. Specifically, I was very sort of not happy with, for separate buildings on a lot, you were using two standards or two definitions, gross floor area definitions that were different. In terms of calculating eventual sort of gross floor area for both the principal building and then the ADU. It doesn't, it's better, if in fact, you keep, that you're using the same formula for both structures. That's my concern, but you change the language so that then the language in there is meant for, and it's specified for the ADU. So I think it's clear, but it's a little confusing because there are two different standards. I also, I'm gonna go to bat for keeping, and this was last time, within section, the rules for all accessory apartments, it's number 8 that got removed when the property changes ownership. So that then the new owner needs to contact ISD. And I'm okay with, now we no longer require annual reviews, but that they understand that they have a unique structure or building on their lot. And that they need to understand how that is controlled and what those rules are. So it's specifically number 8, because it keeps being eliminated, and I think it would be a benefit to everybody if it stayed. So.
I just don't know how we would enforce that if it was change of ownership. How would the new owner know that they had to notify ISD? Because you don't have to do that for anything else. So
Okay.
you're held to all sorts of city ordinance requirements,
Right.
right? When you buy a house, you're held to all sorts of things.
Well,
You're not required to acknowledge those in any other way.
right, but.
So this would be unique in that.
Well, the only thing that would is if you look at 6, that before the certificate of occupancy is issued, the property owners of the dwelling unit shall report with the
But
registry.
you already have,
So
right,
you've got an
Sure.
accessory unit, but what that means is only sort of benefited, by them, going through the process of having contact and then it would be on ISD to inform them of what that is that they actually do in fact own.
yeah, I would want to bring the commissioner into our conversation because that does create a whole new realm of enforcement for them. Whether someone, whenever a property changes hands, if they don't do that,
Okay,
then technically they're have a zoning violation.
Okay.
The-
okay. I'm just going to
Yeah.
back for it, and
No, I
if it doesn't
understand.
apply,
I
it's,
think- Because the requirements are really just physical at this point, so previously it was necessary because you had to have the property owner on site. And that's not something that you can tell from a building permit application, right? And that's a sort of ongoing use issue. Now, it's just like any other zoning requirement, that when you create the space or do the work, you have to meet these physical sort of black and white dimensional requirements. There isn't an ongoing aspect to
There
it.
is in the short-term rental. Because you have.
Yeah,
to-
but that's for any house,
Right,
it's not just specific to ADUs.
no, but we specifically, I think we can't use an ADU
Right.
for short-term rental,
Yeah,
Yes.
right? And that's
Correct.
been part of. And so there is a. Councilor Guess's point about notification, I think, has some merit in that is a use rather than a dimensional aspect. That there may be some value. We don't have to decide it tonight, but I would like to preserve some opportunity because. We work very hard to avoid these becoming basically Airbnbs. And we're responding to a housing need that's a long-term housing need, not a short-term. And we don't want to lose that. And if there's potential aid to the enforcement process through some reporting requirement or that we can legitimately provide. I'd like to hold on, that's just my view, but I think we'd like to hold on to it if we can.
Yeah, I think just as long as the commissioner is involved in that conversation, because it is opening up.
Okay, before we get to the
Difficult
final
enforcement
enforcement, maybe we
for
can.
them.
have a
'Cause it-
conversation with them.
Because the short-term rentals, you have to register. So when you do that, they're checking to see if it's an ADU. So if someone's not registering their short-term rental, they're already in violation. And probably wouldn't have done the ADU certification
Yeah.
either.
They're already a stop
So-
law, so.
Yeah, so like we're catching them at the short-term rental piece.
Well.
Theoretically,
Yeah.
I mean, if they're going to ignore, there's only so much you can do, people are going to
I
ignore.
understand, but
The
I
rules.
I'd like to preserve at least the opportunity if we can, but take a look at that if you would.
Okay,
Councilor Johnson?
that's it for now.
Okay, so let's turn to the second item, and Councilor Albright, you've been very patient, we set you up. Oh, you had a question
On
on
this item, so, I'm not clear, where we are being forced to adopt changes by the state. Is it clear that somehow that they only apply to units that meet the state definition, the state cap of 900 square feet? For example, for like the thing with the 5-foot setback, like, and we still have the provision in there that we can grant a larger detached ADU by special permit. Would we be able to, if we did allow a larger ADU, would we able to require that one to meet the types, the stricter setbacks?
So if it's a larger ADU, it's coming for a special permit. So it's, the whole thing is open to the council's jurisdiction and discretion. We did not, I think there's a prior version where we kept the owner at the request of the chair, the owner occupancy.
Right, and
or,
I'd like to keep
Yeah.
that.
That's another example.
Yes, and we have that in a prior version, I just didn't want to add a fourth attachment and really confuse, or six.
When we get to final, but
Yeah.
I would like to preserve that, and I think Councilor Malachi's point is that for those things that are other than beyond what the state requires, to the extent that you can.
Right, I don't wanna go any further than beyond what we have to do with the state.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we need direction from this committee, because that is a far more complex undertaking. And you probably at that point, given all the changes we have to make, as now we've gotten to the final regulations, I think you're looking at just two completely separate ordinances. One for by right and one for special permit, because there's a lot of changes here. And to calculate gross floor area, and you know, whether or not we're looking at materials and footprint and setbacks and height and all those things. It's a lot. I don't see how we can do it in one ordinance and have it actually be clear. So I think you're looking at two separate ordinances at that point. Our recommendation from the beginning has been to make these changes across the board, because we don't see many ADUs. I think a lot of these do make sense. And once they go above that 900 square feet, it's coming to the council for a special permit. So at that point, you can put on conditions and, you know, review the site plan or determine what makes sense for that particular site on a site-by-site basis. But if the committee wants to do the bare minimum, we need to know that to prepare the ordinance draft.
Let me ask just a drafting question. I understand that the idea about two separate, but isn't it possible, we have general criteria for special permits, and then we have special criteria for special permits. And I think what I'm wondering is whether, in fact, you could not, as a intermediate, provide in the draft that for those special permit ADUs, the committee may elect to impose a greater setback, owner occupancy, all of the things that we're having to give up for the as of rights, but just make it clear that the council could do that. Because the general standards in special permits are pretty general. They don't speak to that But I think it would enhance the appeal of the changes if we could articulate that those aspects which we have to give up for 900 square feet, we could retain as a special permit condition. Maybe not put it in as an as of right requirement.
So we can work with talk to the law department on that. We don't do that anywhere else in the ordinance.
Don't we for energy?
No.
I thought
We say there's criteria for what you should consider when granting that relief. It never, that I'm aware, says the conditions that you can also, that you may put on. I think those are always on the table, and that the council can and does condition those sorts of things. But we can talk to the law department if there's a way to.
If you could do that, I think it would be useful. We're not gonna
Yeah,
decide this
'cause it-
tonight,
'cause
and
it-
we've got a very broad public hearing.
Yeah, because the criteria are essentially questions that are asked, right? And you're responding that yes, it meets this criteria, or no, it doesn't. To say the council may put on larger setbacks. There's not a finding that goes along with that. So all of the criteria have then findings associated with them in the council order. I don't know how you do that, unless it's just sort of some general language that says the council may also consider.
Well, I think that where I would put it, if I were thinking about it as a drafting matter, again, this not to decide tonight. Would say the council may grant a special permit for a larger ADU with conditions that apply, that provide for owner occupancy and greater setbacks than are required as of right. And just say that,
So it gives permission.
gives
to
permission,
ladies to
doesn't,
but
but
it's
it's not required.
So it's not a criteria, it's just a statement.
It's a statement of the scope of the special permit. Because the special permit right now says you can have a special permit for a larger unit. You know, and you might say, you know, if you want to get a larger unit, you have to have greater setbacks or, you know, we're doing a little bit of that. And if you think about the ordinance we've been talking about, the teal. Saying if you come in with a shorter building, you go wider. I mean, they're just stuff that in that context is as a right, but I think here. It would give some comfort to those of us who are. Hate to see the protections that we've had go away. For those things, I mean, obviously, we gotta comply with the law, but to the extent that we wanna do more than the law requires, I think we ought to have more protections for the same opportunity. But that's, we don't have to decide that tonight, but you have a chance to chew on that. Any other comments on the as of right changes so far? I just have one other question, the number of, the requirements of, you know, the unrelated persons. This has been an issue in my ward, and I don't know about other places where some landlords have put lots of people in the building that didn't belong, all of them there at one place at one time, principally students. And we've had been an enforcement problem, as you may recall from the ISD for some time. And so that's a very important safeguard, and what I'm concerned about, is this required, or can we keep the association of persons for the whole thing, or it has to distinguish between the ADU? You don't have to put
It's,
two
yeah.
pots.
We have to do it in 2 pots.
Wow.
Yeah. We can't combine the number of occupants.
Well, that's gonna make life interesting. I don't know what to do about that, but never mind. Okay.
And actually, it doesn't change what's on the ground now, because right now, when you have on the one building, you can't have more than 4 unrelated people. Now you have a very small building. I doubt if they're gonna be putting 4 or 5 people in that. Well, if it's by right, 900 square feet.
You'd be amazed at the ingenuity of some of the landlords in my neighborhood. Never mind. Councilor Farrell.
Just, it could be, you do 1,500 square feet. That's a lot of people.
1,500, yeah, but what we're doing by right now is only what, 900? Yeah.
All right.
That
Thank
would
you.
be another reason to keep the
Yeah,
other way that people
when
for things that are not
when they go to,
complying with the
when 900 square feet, that's again, a occupancy. That's a good point.
Just to clarify. When you mean 2 pots,
you mean by building, by unit?
2 units.
Okay, just making.
Principal
Well,
building.
Just making sure there wasn't some other reference on this, okay. Good.
Okay, thank you. Now, Counselor Albright, finally, you get a chance. So we've got, friends two here. So tell us what you've got in mind.
So one of them is taken care of, which is lovely, but we'll start from the beginning, I guess. So the first one would require, right now, the maximum size for an internal ADU is 1,000 square feet. And the proposal is to make it 1,200, up to 1,200 square feet. As was pointed out to me by many, this is internal to the building. Nobody knows what's going on inside the building. And it's, you know, for lots of reasons. A family could be, a couple who lives in a house, they could be downsizing in 2 different ways. One is to create a unit for themselves and then they let their children move into the house, and the other one is a detached, but we'll get to that in a minute. So if you're creating a unit for yourself to move into, it feels like 1,200 square feet is a better size for that purpose. When you're used to living in a 3,000, 3,500 square foot house, 1,200 is a better number. And I think it's 1,000 and 1,200 by special permit. And it feels to me like the 200 extra square feet is de minimis and doesn't make that much difference. So I would like to have this go to public hearing as well and see how people felt about it.
So, we can just talk about it. I mean, the public hearing opportunity is one. Before you go there, I just want to point out Councilor Malachi's point, I think is accurate in a variety of places. If the special permit can pick up design controls as well. I mean, those are things that we can't do. You know, we're taking them out for the as of right, but the idea of consistency. I know that ISD is unhappy about it, but it's still, I think, an important element if you're going to have something bigger. That the special permit criteria would look at the building and say, does it match? Does it fit with the other?
Well, the internal you wouldn't see.
No.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, yeah, the detached is a different story as far as
No,
materials.
this is on the, just, I didn't want to lose
Yeah.
the point about what the special permit could pick up. That's all.
This is number 1, right?
That's number 1, which
That's
is
not-
internal.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay, well, why don't you go through them
Yeah.
all and then we'll
Okay.
talk about it.
So the second one addresses the external. And I know of some families that have downsized in their homes and added on an external ADU and find the 900 square feet quite limiting. So I would love to see that go. I propose 1,200 square feet with a special permit up to 1,500. And it just gives people more opportunities to be able to downsize and more comfortable. I mean, if FAR will still govern the size of what you can do based on what the primary house is. So you're never, if you can't afford to, by FAR, if you can't afford to do it 1,200, obviously you can't do it. But this gives you the opportunity, the opportunity to move into a 1,200 square foot apartment as opposed to a 900 square foot apartment, which is pretty small. So that's the first 2. The next one was already taken care of because it dealt with the all the design qualification. The next 2, I think, really both deal with historic carriage houses. So the first one has to do with when 2 carriage houses are 15 feet apart or less. Only one of them can be an ADU, and that to me makes no sense because you have buildings that are already in existence. You're not building a new one, they're already there. And why not let both of them be an ADU? I just don't see the sense of not letting that go happen. I don't have more to say about it than that, it just doesn't make sense. And then the next one has to do with, so there are carriage houses which are sometimes larger than 1,500 square feet, but they're the way the ordinance reads now, the carriage houses, tell me if I'm right, man, it's 900 square feet. You need a special permit to use the whole carriage house if it's 1,500 square feet.
So if it's, doesn't fall under this provision, so if it's a carriage house that's in a local historic district.
Yeah.
That's correct. You would need a special permit, to go to 1,500, if it was larger than that, you don't actually have an option, you couldn't use the whole thing.
Right.
Or you could need a special permit for setbacks, things like that, because the carriage houses often do not meet, the current setback requirements. So if you're within a district, you would need special permits for those things. Some things you can't get a special permit for currently, like height. So if your carriage house exceeded the 1.5 stories or 22 feet, and you're in a district, you don't have an option to get a special permit for that.
And if you're outside the district?
If you're outside a district, then you fall under this, you can sort of follow this pathway. So if you have that 15-foot sort of buffer, and it's found historically significant by the historical commission, then you could convert the existing carriage house.
Okay, so we have lots of carriage houses that are not within a historic district.
But that are within the historic district.
Well, not, I mean,
This doesn't apply to historic district,
Yeah.
it applies outside of them.
So that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
there's lots of carriage houses that are not in historic districts, which are larger than 900 square feet, but you can't use the whole thing. They're even sometimes larger than 1,200 square feet.
but you would leave historic districts alone, because these.
Yeah, I'm not touching historic districts, this is for carriage houses that are outside.
No. Which one are you talking about?
Number 5.
So this would
Outside
be,
historic
this
district.
would, so that's, the proposal is to remove
Remove
that
that,
language.
right.
Which means this would apply whether you're within the historic
Yeah,
district
so
or
any,
outside. the
any
historic
carriage
district.
house, that's exactly,
Yes.
thank you for helping me figure out what I'm saying. So it's for any carriage house. It's any existing, yeah,
Existing.
we're not gonna build a.
Well, and it
carriage
would have to be found historic.
Yeah.
So if it's a new carriage house, it's unlikely to be found historically significant. Today,
We're gonna.
maybe
yes,
50
okay,
years from
gotcha,
now.
Right.
So that one again sort of feels to me under the common sense category, because why not let them use the whole carriage house? Why minimize it? If you have a carriage house available, let them use it as an ADU. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. And the last one I know is more controversial than any of the others, and that has to do with ownership and, you know, we're always talking about young families wanting to have the opportunity to buy into new. And it felt to me like this is an opportunity for young families to buy a small ADU and get their foot in the door of home ownership in it. I understand why it's controversial, but I felt it was worth putting on the table just to talk about it.
Okay, I'm gonna take commentary in a minute, but I wanna, let's see who's online. Let me just, make a comment about historic districts. I'm personally not in favor of changing that part. You want to do something outside the historic district, but the regulations specifically carve out historic districts as available for additional restrictions, and I think that's a recognition on the state's part that this is an appropriate way to proceed. If you want to do something outside, that's a different story. I'd like to be persuaded on that score. But that's just my view, but just to clarify that issue. So what I'd like to do is see if the hands are for clarification. And then I want to talk about each of these amendments briefly, just to decide how we proceed when we go forward to the public hearing. So I have, I think, we've got members of the committee, but this is for clarification. Let me just start with Councilor Kalis. And then, who else is the
It's
other hand?
Danver.
Councilor Danver. Oh, I thought you were in Mexico. but-
Yes.
I am.
Oh, all right. Nice to see you. Councilor Kalis.
Yeah, so can you just clarify the last one? Is that just for existing carriage houses?
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, okay,
Existing
Oh.
historic. Or.
okay, okay. And then the second one, and maybe the fourth, I don't know, Susan, you'll have to look at what you have. I'm wondering to Jen, Kyra, what the scope is of those potential changes. Meaning, I think number 2 was, I don't know, I forget, I did it by number.
Number 2 is the one about making external ADUs.
Right, so how many properties can we really make 1,200 square feet ADUs? That's what I mean by scope.
You're talking about internal or external?
External.
Okay.
They're SR1 and SR2.
Yeah, so it's less about the number of properties that could, it's more the number of properties that would. So right now, many properties could do the 900 square foot by right. We're still not seeing many at all. Even since making the 900 square foot detached by right, I think we've seen one that has actually come through that. Only about a quarter of our ADUs are detached. And of those, a good number of are historic carriage houses. So there's a big cost involved with building an ADU. It gets a little better at 1,200 square feet because you're getting a little more space for it. But you're building a whole new house. So all of the, costs that come along with that are spread over a much smaller building. So from what we hear, generally the cost is what's most prohibitive. It's not the lack of space.
Okay.
In the property.
That's really helpful because the would or could, it just means probably, I mean, to me, I think we should allow things like this to see what happens.
Councilor Kalis, that's a choice that we can talk about in a minute, but I just want.
Oh, okay, sorry. There was another, okay, that's it then for now.
Okay, clarification, Councilor Danberg.
I don't have clarification. I'll wait until comment.
Okay, I just want to, Councilor Gibb.
I'm disappointed, when I think at one of our sessions, you mentioned that there were, how many historic carriage houses are there?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, okay, because I thought.
Yeah,
you
A
had
few
said-
years ago, it was about 425.
Okay, I'd like to know what that number is. Yeah.
I don't know that we have that number.
Oh, we don't have it separate.
Councilor Danberg has a memory of one.
Yeah, I can look to see what we have. I think there was some work done on this before I started here.
Okay.
But we don't, so the historic carriage houses outside of the districts,
Right.
which are the ones that can use this.
Mhm.
As far as I know, we haven't sort of proactively deemed all of those historic. What happens is they want to do an EDU and they come to the NHC to make that determination. So it's not that we have a database that I'm aware of that has all of the historic.
It's not in the assessor's data.
It's not.
Okay, all right.
There's another,
So other points of clarification, Councilor Frenchman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not a clarification of those specific proposals, but in some respect, it's a response to the question Councilor Oliver raised about the invalidity clause. The way I read that, okay, it says if anything in the ordinance is invalid, then the whole thing is invalid. So it's actually separate and distinct from a severability clause. My question is, should we consider replacing it with a severability clause now that we're operating more under a state statute? And it just seems like we may want to convert that. So maybe that's a question for the law department or Ms. Kyra, I don't know, but it seems like we may want to entertain that change as well.
That's not before us at the moment, but it's a reasonable question, so.
Well, I mean, the reason I propose it is because if we're going to go to public hearing, it may be something that we want to include.
Yeah, okay. That's a fair question.
but we're not going to public hearing on the floodplain, are we?
No.
No.
Okay, that was in the floodplain, right?
This was an
That
ADU.
was ADU.
Oh, ADU, okay, yeah.
No, the floodplain, mercifully, we do not have a public hearing on the floodplain. If the committee wants to recommend we do, I'm delighted to have Sheriff designate all of them. Anyway.
Yeah, let's put that to a vote.
All right, any other points of clarification? Then I'd like to go back to just take them in order, just to get a sense of whether to take them to public hearing. Okay, I mean, public hearing is broad in scope, and so people can talk about anything, but I'd like to see if there's sense in the committee or not. The basic question of the first group is that we're trying to do something to comply with state law. The point that Councilor Albright is making is, can we, and should we do anything else? And so the first one that she's talking about is expanding the as of right internal ADU size. And now that these are considered separate units still, you know, regardless of the state law changes, they're considered separate units. If we make the change in the state law for numbers of persons, right? We've got basically that applies regardless of the size of the internal unit. Right, so that's going to happen because of state law. So I just want to make a point of clarification that what we're doing is now where we had a limit of 4 unrelated people on the site, including the ADU. Now we could have 8 people in the site, and it's a bigger building to a bigger space to put more people in. And that's, you know, maybe what you want to do, but that's part of my concern about it. But that's just my view. So let's just, have I represented the choice is to add 200 square feet as a right internal, okay? That's all right.
So in general, for some of the ones for what Councilor Albright's proposing, I do support, but I would like to, let's just get something that passes for the state. And then move on, and I like to, you know, work on reducing tear downs and things like that, and then we can come back to this to do other things. But I don't want to be spinning our wheels extra during this time because there's other things we want to get done sooner. So I'd rather just in general, let's pass what we need for the state compliance and then move on.
So can I comment on that? Or not?
Sure, but let me just see, okay, but we're gonna get everybody's point of view, Councilor.
Yeah.
Yes?
Well, you know, one concern that I have is the, you know, in terms of a new build and the pressure that it puts on an existing building to, if in fact you allow a larger internal, you know, whether or not you've got an existing building and you want to tear it down so that you can create within that structure the, you know, the additional 1,200 square feet. So that's the driving force for me, you know, in terms of thinking through how much FAR a lot can contain, you know, and whether or not it's putting pressure on the existing home to, you know, put a larger unit in the property. So when we got into the question earlier from Councilor Kalis, it was sort of getting an assessment of like how many lots is this impacting, you know, in terms of existing homes. So this gets into a lot of data requests, but you know, I just sort of see this as potentially, as Councilor Wright is suggesting, maybe we just go through the process, comply. We're already out of compliance because the regulation is in effect, correct? The law is in effect. We are as of February 2nd.
Yeah,
It
we're
is the law.
inconsistent.
Yeah, so we're in that status. So let's get our zoning to the status of, you know, being consistent with the law.
You're agreeing with Councilor Wright on this question, I guess, in general.
Yeah.
Councilor Albright will have a chance to respond, but I just
Okay.
want to get a sense of the committee. I have Councilor Danberg, you have your hand up, and I think Councilor Kalis has his hand up. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Are we just discussing number one?
We're not discussing number one, but Councilor Wright has raised the question of whether we should do any of these now, as opposed to.
Okay, I'll comment on that too. I think we've already started the commentary. We've done our homework. We've read through these proposals, and I think it would be a travesty if we decided to just kill all of the discussion at this point and say, let's just go for what we're required to do by the state. We know that this committee is so busy that it would be months, if even by the end of this term that we would ever get to it. So I think that we should continue the discussion and come to an agreement on what we think, we like and what we don't. So on the,
We might as well just get the threshold issue out and then have the conversation about that first and then see about the.
okay,
Let me recognize Councilor Kalis, who had his hand up, and then I'll come to
Counselor Larry is up there too.
Councilor Oliver. I'm going to recognize.
Yeah,
members.
I wouldn't mind doing a straw vote on all the 5 things that Counselor Albright has brought up. So I'm kind of in disagreement with Wright and Getz on this. This is open. We're here. I'd rather cover it if we can.
Fair enough. Councilor Oliver.
Thank you. If we're talking of like, I'll just stick to the threshold question. Everything that, not only Councilors Kalis and Danberg have now said, but what I assume, Councilor Albright is about to say, to a degree, I completely agree. However, the exact same thing can and has been said about items that have been on our agenda for over a year now. Pause for dramatic effect. Over a year. Like, I like these items, like they all warrant conversation, in my opinion. However, get in line. I gotta tell you, like this tear down issue is a much bigger deal in different parts of town than increasing the ability to create ADUs. Let me rephrase that. Let's take them in the order in which they were brought to the committee. I think that is fair. I think that is appropriate. I don't understand why we're so afraid of topic A, but so eager to finish topic B that came around a year later. Can we please finish the topics that we put on the table literally a year ago, please? Thank you.
Let's see, anybody else on the committee that I haven't heard from?
No, Councilor Leary.
Councilor Leary is not on the committee. I'll hear from her and then I'll express my views. Councilor Leary. Welcome.
Thank you.
We see your.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize for joining late. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I am thinking that I want to agree with Councilor Albright on this. The ADUs are, I think, an easier way to add additional types of housing units, and we haven't had that many of them. So I think we still need to make it. I think it's a fairly low-hanging fruit in terms of being able to add some diverse housing choices, especially as folks age. And I also think it's really important that families live together, and that's happening more and more, intergenerational living. I think it supports that. And just because we haven't, if I can understand Councilor Oliver correctly, that we've been behind the 8 ball on other projects, I don't think that's a reason for us not to, complete this one with adding the 200 feet while we have 200 square feet while we have the opportunity to do so. And I also just wanted to ask clarification for Councilor Getz's comment about, my understanding is Councilor Getz is concerned about that this would add an additional pressure on tear downs for existing homes. And I think I've heard this argument before that that someone would tear down an existing home to add an internal ADU. But what they would do, they would just tear down the home and they'd build a much larger home on the site. I don't think it would be because they wanted to add an ADU. That I don't think would make a lot of sense to most people to do that, or to a developer who tend to want to continue with the large single family home. So those are my comments on this particular item. Thank you.
Councilor, okay, I guess, I'm sorry, Councilor Farrell. And
Just, I would just, quick, 1,000 square feet is a big space. I know lots of people who are happily living in 750, 800 square feet space. Two, it is possible to go to the 1,200 square feet with special permit. I don't think it's such an onerous process that it would deny someone. We don't have any, thirdly, we don't have any indication now as far as I'm hearing from you, that there's a great clamor for larger spaces. There isn't exactly a great clamor for any ADU, any spaces. And I think it works to go with what we got here and see what happens.
Counselor Pelican.
I would concur with Councilors Wright, Councilors Oliver, Councilor Farrell. I think that the more we allow bigger, more liberal conditions, especially the size, we're getting away from what ADUs were sold to us originally as being a smaller, affordable subsidiary to the main unit. And as Councilor Farrell said, 1,200 square feet, that's many houses. And you're essentially creating a second house in a lot. And somehow it seems that the fact that we don't have many ADUs being done, people seem to want to keep changing things so that more people will build ADUs, but only so many people maybe want to have a second family or a second unit in their backyard or as part of their house. And don't force people to do something they don't want to do.
So I just want to say that I too would rather just go with what we need to do. We have two docket items. I want to respect Councilor Albright's point of view, however, and I think that doesn't decide, but you have to decide what you want to take to public hearing. I think it would be helpful to get a view from the members of the committee on the individual items, just to see the sense of the committee, because that's really where we've heard from people outside the committee, but I think we need to just give you a sense of that. But if I had my vote, I would not advance Corinne's too. But we haven't decided that. We've got the public hearing and we will have a chance. But I think we probably owe you some sense of the merits on the individual items.
So I would like to respond to the comments that
Sure.
have come up. First of all, we've been working on ADUs for 40 years now, and we have what, 110? 121 over 40 years. It's a very expensive proposition to do one of these, and I think we should all recognize that. And I've talked to people who would like to live in an ADU. I've talked to the building professionals who are being asked to design ADUs. And they are being told by the people who want them that they would like to have a bigger space. Especially since it's cost so much money to add one of these, either internal or external. They don't do it because it doesn't provide them enough living space. Especially people who are used to living in our large houses that we have in Newton. And you have to take that into account. 1,200 square feet is not.
Well, that's on the merits of that. I thought you were going to respond on the.
Yeah, so the point is that we have waited a long time for these state regs that are pushing us in a certain direction to make it easier for people, and I think that's great. But these first two, for example, that have to do with the size of the ADU, has a lot to do with whether people are going to be willing to spend the money to create one of these. It has to be large enough to make sense.
But I'm going to just go around and get a sense. We can talk about the merits of them, but I just want to indicate that where we are. Councilor Wright.
Can I talk to the first item?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we're going to talk about
Okay.
the items as a general matter.
Okay, Councilor Getz brings up a good point, is if we increase the internal size to 1,200 square feet, there's gonna be more pressure for a tear down, especially in single family districts, because right now, in the MR district, how often do they put a single family house versus 2 units? And they tear down the 1 unit and put in 2 units, and that happens all the time, but you're not allowed to do it in SR1 or SR, I should say. So allowing for a new build to have the 1,200 square foot ADU, I wouldn't, agree on. I
I'm
could
gonna keep-
possibly be persuaded for existing houses, but not on new houses. And just because it's gonna put pressure on a tear down in the SR districts, because we don't allow 2 units on SR by right type of thing, but we do an MR, and pretty much, from my knowledge, is most of the ones that are being torn down to go up.
Or more.
Yeah.
On the merits of this particular first item, we gave me a sense of the committee, to Councilor Albright and go forward. I personally not in favor of this for, part of my concern is that the idea that Councilor, Maliki pointed out, which was the original, and I went back to the original special permit. I was on the task force that made them possible. So even though I'm cautious about them, I did support it. Just for the record, it was almost 40 years ago. But the concern I have is again that the shift from the dynamic of a single family house to an accessory to something that's more resembling a 2-family. And that to me is a major shift. And some of the other reasons have been articulated. So I'm not prepared to support it, but I just want to let you know that. Councilor Getz again, and then I'll go back to Councilor Danberg. You have your hand up, and Councilor Kalis. I think you've expressed yourselves, but I want to make sure.
Yeah.
Councilor Danberg.
Just 2 responses. I actually live in a house that's 1,200 square feet of building footprint, so I have a really good sense of what that volume is, you know, in terms of actual living space. And it's a big space. But I am more concerned what we were just talking about in terms of tear downs, because I really do feel as if, you know, the way things are shifting now, that they, you know, will potentially turn into rental units and, you know, can provide income. But I'm more concerned about the tear down phenomena, because I think that that's what's going to happen if you put this pressure on existing single family homes to create an internal ADU at 1,200 square feet. I looked around and I've looked at, you know, all of our budding communities. I'm not seeing anybody putting into the current regs anything more than 900 square feet is allowed. Not, you know, I've seen other ideas that I think are potential, but nothing larger than 900 square feet. So I sort of feel as if I'm pretty firm, you know, with allowing a subservient, you know, dwelling unit in an existing home at the 900.
No, it's 1,000 now.
Oh, well, that's what I'm, you know, the existing.
Okay, let me hear from Councilor. This is on item 1, just to get a sense. And again, we're not, Councilor Albright has to decide where she wants to go with Councilor Danberg and then Councilor Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I don't understand how, if we as a community and we as a board are trying to give people in the community the option of being heard, how we are attempting to quash this at this point without allowing this to go to public hearing and hearing from the public. I think we have an obligation to hear what the public is saying, and we're quashing this at this point if we say, no, we're not going to allow these things to be heard. How can we deny people the opportunity of hearing what the options are? So I don't understand how in the interest of transparency and the interest of allowing people to have their say, we would be willing to shut this thing down at this point without allowing people to opine on it.
Thank you. Councilor
And that being said, I think that first of all, I disagree that allowing 1,200 or 1,500 square feet in a very large old home, of which we have many of them, by special permit, and 1,200 by right. I disagree vehemently that would put any pressure on tear downs. In fact, I think it would do exactly the opposite. I think it would encourage people to keep their old homes because they're now able to carve out a significant piece of the interior. And what difference would it make in the neighborhood? It does not, it does not harm neighbors in any way. What goes on in the house or how the house is divided should not matter to the neighborhood. I don't see any downside to this.
Okay, Councilor Kalin.
I totally agree with Counselor Danberg. I think she really articulated it well. But moreover, what are we doing here? Didn't we just talk about the whole threshold issue and did we decide anything? I mean, why are we talking about these 1 through 5 now if it seemed like we weren't going to be moving forward? I don't want to have this conversation in a year, the same conversation all over again. So are we moving forward with these or are we not?
Well, that's a fair question. The sense of the committee was not to support these, but I wanted to give Councilor Albright a sense of the committee on the individual items.
Well, if we're going to talk about them, I would say let's move them forward and get them to public hearing. If that's not your intention, it's a waste of time.
Well, that's a fair point. Let me hear from Councilor Christman and then I'll come back to you.
I agree with Councilor Kalis.
So,
Why don't we do a straw vote on whether to move this forward or not?
yeah, all right. I think Councilor, all right.
I just have a question. I mean, no matter if we move it forward or not, public comment, they can say anything. They can argue that the sky is purple. So they can comment on these.
Yeah, but there'll be no language to comment on it without moving these amendments forward.
Okay, okay.
And are we, sorry,
Go ahead.
are we? I thought we were going through a process of determining which go forward and which don't, or which would and which wouldn't. Because there are some in here that I think are. I would agree with, like, I'm happy to take forward to public comment. There are 1 or 2 that I'm not. So I guess that's my question, all or nothing, or pick and choose?
Well, I think is a fair matter here, and because I was the extra vote, I'm not prepared to support any of these going forward. I just want to say that up front. But as a matter of fairness to the public and fairness to you, I wanted to give a conversation and see where you want to proceed. If you think that there's merit in pursuing it with the sentiment of the committee and the straw vote among the committee, you can take it out and we can have language for it. But if not, then I would rather not have language go out and not entertain that conversation.
I'm hearing from people who are wanting to do ADUs. I'm hearing from architects who are being asked to design ADUs. And I'm hearing that that's what the people in Newton would like to have. They would like to have some of these elements added to our ADU ordinance. And I think Councilor Oliver has, made a very good point about it could be pick and choose. Maybe not all of them go through the public hearing, but maybe there's a
All right,
consensus.
so why don't we see which of the members of the committee are comfortable with this? Let's go through the process and talk about each one. And just get you a sense of the committee about whether to take it to public hearing or not.
Well, I mean, committee's gonna have whatever opinion, it doesn't have to give me a sense of the committee. The
Well-
committee needs to decide what it wants to do.
All right, so let's see which ones we want to send up to public hearing. All right, but I think the sentiment is, I've heard several members of the committee that would like to talk about individual items. So let's see where we are on the first item, okay? So the first item is to expand to 1,200 square feet as of right and 1,500 square feet, okay? Let's just get Councilor Wright.
I would like to make an amendment to that to say in existing structures only, not in new builds. Because that would take away that pressure for the tear down.
I would be fine with that. Is that doable?
No, you can do that.
So, anytime you're defining existing, it gets tricky. There previously was a provision that you needed a special permit to add an ADU to a home that was less than 4 years old. That was removed 2 or more years ago. So you'd have to do something like that you could do a larger, 1,000 square feet by right, 1,200 by right if it's more than 4 years old or some number. And then beyond that by special permit. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, we had that provision precisely for that reason, because we had tried not to have the parcels. Basically, somebody tearing down something to put up, effectively two family, or, when you begin to get bigger. So, if there's a sense that, and I'm not personally in favor of it, but I'll just see where the committee is. Councilor Wright, you've indicated that if there's some way to make sure there was revived the 4-year threshold or something like that, you would be willing to support this as an internally,
Yeah.
right?
And it still has to be under 50%, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other members of the committee just get a sense, Councilor Guest?
Well, that's actually a provision that's in the Western ordinance that, they're proposing the 4-year, existing building. So, so it's there, but I also would suggest that, what concerns me is, what I've always mentioned is the, creating a larger building to create the unit. But I do like the idea of it being in existence and in existence for 4 years. But when we talk about language, that you would actually have to draft zoning language to then, or we're talking about specifically just for the public hearing notice.
I think the public hearing notice is fairly broad, if I recall.
So it's already
I
captured.
think that, that's been advertised.
Okay, so then you need to generate ordinance language.
We would need to generate ordinance language, yes, because this is ultimately something you would be voting on.
Okay.
It could be after the public hearing,
Correct.
or would be.
Would be.
Might be a better way.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
are you
I don't
willing
think-
to accept those 2 amendments?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Let me just recognize people in the room here, and Councilor.
A quick question, saying it should approve it. If you're saying, is this then 1,200 by right and then up to 1,500 by?
Do we allow
Such word, did you
1,500?
say that?
Says
I didn't hear.
1,200, so.
I don't think we allow 1,500.
No.
Oh, sorry, so then there would be no special permit option.
No, there's no special
Sorry.
permit.
Oh,
Correct.
okay.
Okay, no special permit on
My
that.
mistake.
Okay, members of the committee, or excuse me, Councilor.
Do you want Mr. Lamel?
Yeah, I'm gonna get members of the committee. Who's saying?
Or do you want
I
to do
can't see.
Mr. Lamel though? From Planning?
Mr. Lamel, you want to say something?
I just quickly wanted to comment on existing and creating an amendment to add that language, and just that the language was removed, a couple of years ago, specifically because you weren't finding, you weren't finding it, there was no issue here. And I agree with the conversation that was being had earlier that this, upping it to 1,200 square feet, this 200 additional square feet isn't going to create an issue. The typical 2-family home in Newton, each unit is well over 3,000 square feet. The financial gain from a developer's perspective, they wouldn't see this as the ability to turn a single family home in an SR district into a 2-family home, because again, it's not equivalent to what's getting built right now. So I do think it would get messy if you were to add an existing provision back into this. And I can get the exact language, and we can pull the reports on why the council voted to remove that a couple years back in the first place.
For purposes of the conversation, let's see, let's assume that you can do that, even if it's messy. And maybe we don't keep it, but at least we know what we're talking about. Councilor Leary, I saw your hand up. Is this a new hand?
Yes, actually, it was a little bit while ago. I was just wanted to align myself with the comments of Councilor Danberg and Kalis and Krinsman on the prior discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so let's just get a sense of Councilor Mallory, sorry.
First of all, responding to Mr. Lavelle, if you don't think it's really gonna make a difference, it shouldn't do any harm to put it in.
You mean the 4-year look back?
Yeah.
Right, And on the question of the, where you look at, I'd rather see, rather than have it be this rolling 4-year thing. Just have a date, anything built before 2025. If you're serious about wanting to preserve existing houses and not incentivize tear downs. And the other thing, first point I originally wanted to make was that, it's not as if somebody wanting to downsize from their big house, say it's, I don't know, 3,500 square feet or whatever, has to go into their 1,000 square foot ADU. They could give or rent the 1,000 square foot ADU to their, daughter, son, and their family, strangers, whatever, and stay in the 2,500 feet that's left and see how that goes before they try to go into the smaller size. So
That's not what happens though. That's not how it works.
No, just.
Yeah, sorry, that's not how it works.
But I would like to preserve the smallness of ADUs, to go back to the original concept of them.
Okay, so, let's just get a sense of the committee, how many people would like, assuming there's some look back just for clarification, because several people have indicated that. Would be open to at least sending forward the idea of the 1,200 square feet. 1, 2, 3, 4. Councilor Kalis, Councilor Danberg, is that you?
Yes,
Okay. And Councilor Crenshaw, okay. That's a clear majority of the committee. I'm not in favor, but that's fine. That's what we do. All right, let's go forward to the second one. This is the separate structure one, right?
This is a separate structure.
Yes. And this would, right now, it's 900 square feet is what we're talking about, is as of right. Right, and you're advocating up to 1,200 square feet as of right?
Yes.
Okay. I just said that this is a vastly different thing for me, because it really is making a much larger structure as opposed to an accessory structure. So I'm not going to support it, but that's just my view. But that's not a surprise, I suspect. Members of the committee, where were we? Councilor Bright.
I feel the same way. I mean, you can use with a special permit go up. And, ADUs for the most part, by a special permit, are approved pretty easily. So I don't see it as much of a burden, if you have your ducks in a row and go in and it shouldn't be a problem, but there might be an issue there, and so that's why I'd rather not see it. But if it did pass, maybe we just do it for SR1 and SR2 lots.
Okay. Councilor, let's just go around the committee. Councilor Guest.
Well, are you proposing it?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Right now, I mean, if I was forced to do something, I would put it there, but right now, I would not support it.
Yeah, this is too large for me, and then I'm back to my house being of building footprint of 1,200, and I'm back to looking around and seeing that 900 is, what's being, proposed in our surrounding communities. So I just sort of feel that the impact that's going to be felt by a unit that's this size, especially with the proximity that is permitted, is going to be a real problem. So we can go to this and get to this, but not at this juncture.
Councilor Oliver.
I'm actually not opposed to the 1,200. But maybe eliminate the special permit to 1,500. And I'm now just starting to, like, how does this interact with? I don't want to mess up the number. Your number 5.
That's about carriage house.
Understood, but theoretically. Is there a specific definition of a carriage house that's different than what this structure would be? Like, are they completely and always separate universes of buildings?
Yeah, there's a separate section of the ordinance.
Understood, but the definition of the building.
Let me just point out before we go to everybody else, just to the point of clarification. if we make the changes in the as, we're required to, remember, we're now going to within 5 feet of the lot line. You're going up to a building height of up to 22 feet. This is, the potentially 1,200 square feet is a major piece of construction right next to somebody else. And part of the concern that I've had, and the issues that are concerned generally, is just, again, the impact on the butters. And so that's just my concern about this, but you have to
Yeah,
decide.
no, and I understand that, and that is actually. That continues, I'm actually more concerned about the impact to abutters than I am to what someone is allowed to do on their own lot, as long as it's off the property line. So that's always a concern of mine. And again, I would top this out at 1,200, and if that doesn't make sense, then I would be a no on this one.
Is 1,500 in the ordinance now?
So 1,500's in the ordinance now, as far as the definition of a carriage house, so it does have to be found to be a historic carriage house, and NHC is used to reviewing these. So they are, I mean, a carriage house is gonna be a separate structure, right? And they're determining whether it's historically significant. So it's not just anything could be called a carriage house, it's not that you could just have a big garage and
Call it a carriage house.
Yeah, it has to be found a historically significant carriage house. I would say if you are considering removing the special permit provision. For the detached ADU, you may want to consider. The number 5 here from Councilor Albright's proposals, because. You're removing one potential avenue for the preservation and conversion of historic carriage houses in districts. To be more than 900 square feet. Right now, they could go through the detached they don't qualify for the carriage house exemption. But they could still get that special permit to convert if they're up to 1,500 square feet. If you do remove that special permit provision, you are restricting what can happen with historic carriage houses within historic districts.
Personally, I would keep just to clarify, special permit, I would keep it because we talked about trying to keep some of the other controls. If we do special permits, the owner occupancy and other things. And that gives us a handle on this, but I would, again, the number of people unrelated you can put into 1,200 square feet is a lot more than you can in 900, so again, it's fine. Yeah. Let me get a sense then of the committee. Councilor Danberg, you in favor of Councilor Highlight's proposal for this number 2?
Yes, I do, and I also think that that any of these ideas ought to have the right to be heard at public hearing, even the ones that I don't agree with, that I would vote no on. I think that it's imperative that we give the public the opportunity to speak on these things. Who are we to keep something from going to public hearing and hearing from the public on it? So yes, I would agree with the provision for number 2 going to public hearing, and I think that all of these ought to go to public hearing just so that we can hear from them, from the public.
I appreciate that. Councilor Caleb.
I feel like Councilor Danberg is on fire tonight. I agree again with her. But I gotta say, on this one, I'm not sure, like, I don't know how, if we're, I think it should go to public hearing. I don't know how I would vote on it. The 5 feet setback is concerning to me. And so I would just need to think about it more, and that's why I'd want more public input.
Okay. So we have,
Councilor Princeman.
yeah, Councilor Princeman, do you want to opine on this one?
Yeah, although I disagree with my esteemed colleagues that not everything should go to public hearing. I think that's part of what we do, is in some ways act as gatekeepers. But I am comfortable with this going at least to public hearing. I'm comfortable with this for the reasons really cited in the memo from Councilor Albright. So I won't belabor the point, but I'd be comfortable moving this one forward.
So I think we've got there Counselor Albright, Counselor Danberg, Counselor, we got 4 and 4. As I read this, oh no, I can't count Counselor Oliver, so I think we send this out and let people talk about it, please. Okay. This would, the amendment on finish is already taken care of, right? Or would exempt buildings that are 15 adjacent lots. This is, allow each building to become an ADU. This was a separation idea. They were trying to keep things more than 15 feet apart. And
This is an can you say an existing building in this one?
Well, they have to be historic carriage houses for them
Okay.
to be existing.
Yeah, okay, so it's only for existing historic carriage houses.
and that's a change, or is that what we have now?
That's what we have now.
So you wouldn't actually change this, right?
You would remove the 15-foot requirement,
Yeah,
is the
that's-
proposal, I believe.
But within historic districts, you leave it alone. Right, because they're
That's number five.
historic carriage houses are separated as not in historic district. Right?
Help me.
So that's number 5.
Yeah, no, but that's a different question. I just want to be clear
Correct.
that what you're talking about is the 15 feet separation is it within both districts, historic or not?
Well, right now, none of this applies to a historic district.
Yeah,
So if you just do number 4, it would only apply outside of historic
Yeah.
districts. If you do 4 and 5, it would also apply within historic districts.
how, Councilor Wright?
So this is existing structures, so we're not building anything new, so they're right there. I have no problem supporting that. My whole idea on all of this is when you're building a new structure, someone buys a house, they know there's a carriage house right next door to them. You know, versus putting up a 12 or 1,500 square foot building, 5 feet from the property line, that's a little bit different, but this, no problem.
Councilor Cass?
Okay, now I'm a little sort of, it says, in her commentary here is that there is no reason to prevent the use of both buildings to become by right ADUs. So you're asking for 2 ADUs on a single lot.
No, separate lots.
Different lots.
Neighboring lots.
Neighboring.
Oh, where's that?
First,
Adjacent line, the first sentence,
Yeah.
okay, that sentence was the one I just picked up on. So, okay.
Okay, Councilor Oliver?
This one I don't have a problem with. Existing structures,
Councilor Cass?
fine.
I mean, excuse me, Councilor Danberg. Oh, yeah, Councilor, yes, all right.
Yes, thank you. So what we're discussing now is the 5 foot or having two occupied ADUs in historic carriage houses too close
No.
together. That's
No.
okay. My own carriage house is occupied and has been since 1941 and is preventing the historic carriage house next door from having an ADU in it because the two are close together. The other carriage house is on our property line. So I don't see any reason why the carriage house next door to me should not also be allowed to have an ADU. So I am in favor. I am fine with limiting this to historic carriage houses, but I think that if these buildings are there and have been there since a long time ago, that we should allow, we shouldn't set neighbors up to, as it was explained, I think, in the memo, whoever gets to put an ADU in their building first wins and keeps the other one out. I don't think that should happen. And I think it should go to public hearing.
Favor of taking it to public hearing.
Sharon said she's in favor of all of them.
Yes is fine.
No, I know, I'm just, I mean, it's late,
Okay.
all right. Who hasn't been heard from on the committee or otherwise? Yeah, Councilor Kalis, I'm sorry. And then I come- Princeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know it's getting late, so I want to make sure people are listening to what I'm about to say. I agree with Counselor Wright.
Okay. Councilor Kalis,
I'm good with these.
okay. And actually, I'm gonna be supporting this.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
got you
you
on
gotta
one,
put
you
something. No, not the next one, I'll tell you, but never mind. Okay, historic districts.
James, can you explain this one, because I'm not good at it.
So the way the ordinance is written right now is there's a separate pathway for historic carriage houses to convert. Where they don't have to meet the other requirements as long as it's just converting the existing building. So they may be bigger than the 900 square feet, they may be slightly taller than the 22 feet. They may not meet the setbacks, but if they're found to be a historically significant building. They can convert to an ADU. This pathway only exists for historic carriage houses that are not located in a historic district. So if they're located in a historic district, they would have to meet all of the requirements for a regular detached ADU. So the 900 square feet or whatever it ends up being, the 1.5 stories, the setbacks. If they're outside of the district, they have this option, but have to be found historically significant first. Is that?
Yes, so it
makes sense?
I support keeping it the same way in the district because it's been area carved out specifically in the regulations also. For special treatment, and I think it's important to maintain that, but that's my view. Counselor, let's go around the committee. Counselor Rowe?
Again, I support it. It's there. You know, and we're not building new, so I have no problems.
Okay. Counselor Gill?
Yeah, I'm fine. No, existing is not a problem for me.
Well,
And
the
if it's
problem is
already,
it doesn't have to be existing, it goes.
It does. It has to be found historically significant.
Well, in an historic district, it may be historic, not historic.
Well, no, it still has to be found historically
Okay.
significant.
All right, Counselor Oliver.
I'll channel Counselor Krinsman and agree with Counselor Wright.
All right, Counselor, can I presume that Counselor Krinsman, Bayless and Danberg support this?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, so there you have it. I'm not gonna support it, but we take it to public hearing. All right, last one, this is double ownership. This is the major shift. Yeah, I would,
Thanks for trying.
all right, so we not take that to public hearing? Okay, all right. All right, so we're gonna take all of these items to public hearing and you can draft language for that effect, except the last.
Okay, no
Okay.
public hearing for
All
number
right.
6.
Everybody clear on the mission? Then we'll hear from the public, then we'll have working sessions on it afterwards, not that night, because we got a bunch of things going on. But we will have a chance to talk this over, all right? Everybody clear? Any comments, Counselor Krinsman?
Just a last plug, can we talk about converting the clause to a
oh, the last thing.
Oh, the severability.
severability clause?
Let's find out from the law department about that, and, but we can do that. The scope of the language is broad enough for the public hearing.
Yeah, as long as the scope is broad enough, that's fine. I just don't want to lose the opportunity to raise that issue. So that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
It looks like she's trying to
Whose
say.
hand is up? Counselor Kalis.
No.
Oh, Counselor Danberg, I'm sorry.
Thank you. There was only one other thing that I wanted to bring up that we haven't talked about. And there was a clause, I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry. Whichever is less or whichever is greater, I forget how it reads. But I thought that was something that we might want to hear from the public on also. Can we add that to the things that would be brought to public hearing?
That's the ordinance, the way the state law.
The state told us.
The state law says whichever.
Oh, okay, so we don't need to bring it to public hearing. Good, okay, thank you. That's it.
Ms. Wilson.
Ms. Wilson?
To comment on what Councillor Krinsman brought up, I had noticed the same thing as well when the invalidity clause was just brought up at the beginning of this meeting. Like Jen Kyra said, that's not something that we changed in our edits. So I'd want to go back and see exactly if we can find out exactly why it was written that way. But I had the same thought as Councillor Krinsman that there is a good chance that we should update that to make it a severability clause.
Okay. All right, but there's room in the public hearing notice to do that, so we
Yes.
just. Okay. All right, so I would entertain, Counselor.
I just had a
Maliki.
thought, had it a while back, when Ms. Carter said we almost need two ordinances, when we just saw it's still coming with two ordinances for two different categories of flooding areas. It seems to me that we already have one of the ordinances because it's our existing ordinance. You can keep that for ADUs that do not meet the
Is that right?
the cap for as of right under the state rules, and the second ordinance is basically what you're drafting.
Well, that's an interesting point. And we look at that because it may be that, because there is the alternative is a special permit, but the other is to say, okay, there's an as of right category and a special permit category. Here's the stuff that we do for special permits and.
Is that in lieu of putting the statement that the council may consider greater setbacks on our occupancy, et cetera, as part of the special permit?
Well, that's what's being suggested. I just
Well, I
wonder.
think the advantage to having it sort of in black and white set where people can read it. This alternative or
Why
not
don't
alternative,
we?
rather than.
Yeah,
a
that's a fair
paragraph
question.
it's a
Fair
paragraph
question.
that's
I think that,
like-
yeah, I think what it'd be helpful to have, I don't think you can decide that tonight, but let's see what, maybe we can talk offline about that.
Yeah, I mean, you essentially have that, right? You have our red line of what we have to do. And then you have the existing ordinance. I would say, I think it will create confusion because you're going to be measuring things differently. Different definitions of how you're calculating the space. But we would just need direction on what we're providing for the public hearing.
Well, I think the question is, if you kept the kind of changes you're making in definition for everything, but kept the other part for special permit, the criteria that, that it has to meet the compatibility requirement and so forth, that, couldn't you do that as a draft that we could talk about?
I would want to be sure that that's the direction the committee is going. Again, it's a good bit of work. If we are going to start now sort of parsing out, some of these things apply by right and special permit. Some of these things only apply when there's a special permit. Do you then also need the ability to waive some of these things by special permit? Because they won't be applying to the by right ADUs, but once they get 200 square feet larger, now all these other provisions kick in that don't actually have a special permit waiver provision. So there's a lot of things that need to be
That's
sorted.
a fair question. Let's just spend a minute on this then, instead of trying to give you some guidance. The question is if there were, and while it takes some drafting activity, if there were a way to preserve the owner occupancy or the compatibility or the other things that we are having to give up because of state law for larger units that were not as of right. Okay, let's presume the as of right categories, and whatever the number comes in is going to be the number. Because it doesn't make sense to have, the state category 900, then the 1200 if that passes, for example. So let's assume that we have an as of right group, but if there is a special permit group, is there sentiment on the committee to see a version where we would preserve as much of the existing ordinance for the special permit categories?
I'm not in favor.
You're not in favor of that. Let's just see members of the committee. Councilor Wright.
I'm still thinking about it. I'm just undecided. In one way, it would make it easier reading the ordinance. Okay, this is an ADU by right. You just read it, and if you want to go beyond that, this is this ordinance. So in that respect, I think it would be easier, because otherwise you're going through each thing and, it's only this, but you can do this by special permit and things like that. And I think just knowing what you can do by right, and that's what people want to know versus special permit, is breaking it up makes it easier there.
Okay, Councilor Gunn?
Well, I think that what I'm looking at right now is the draft that you created on January 13th. The one that you didn't want to add as a attachment 4. You know,
Oh, so that one just kept the owner occupancy.
okay,
Yes.
all right.
So we would need
More,
more, that would have been, there would have been 6 attachments. Had we carried that through. Which is why I didn't put it, but it's something that we can add back in. I think what we need to know is the committee just interested in certain provisions apply when there's a special permit? Is it everything? Because again, there's things such as how habitable space versus floor area. And how you're defining certain things. Or what was discussed earlier, which was just adding that because by definition, those that aren't by right are coming to the council for review. And, you know, there's discretion in the special permit process. Is it just making clear that these are all things that can be considered?
well, I see in this, just in this draft, that A would be the only one that's applicable is the owner occupancy, because the other 2 have been striked because of the, you know, what's required of. They were removed from the version that we were looking at earlier today, where it was like the needing to, within 30 days, the ownership, when the property ownership changes. And then the third piece was, you know, the yearly compliance. So you would only need A.
It's not just that.
No, I'm looking through this to try and figure out what pieces would actually.
It's everything that's struck in attachment A. So everything that's crossed out would come back. And just apply to just apply to those ADUs
So
that are greater than 900 or 1,000 square
let me,
feet.
let me offer this.
Not just.
Okay.
If you had,
Conversation is.
I'm persuaded, I think, that there is value in simplicity in the sense that while I like the consistency. For instance, consistency of materials, I would put in a special permit condition. Right? And there's an idea that would be make sense. The one that I would like to have as a threshold is the owner occupancy if you have a special permit for a bigger unit. But I think that's a safeguard that is an important part of what we built into the ordinance. And keeps the property really an accessory as opposed to turning it into a syndicated second unit. And I'm uneasy about the syndication risks. So to the extent that we have a hybrid, what I would propose that you get back to us is a special permit where there are specific things that can be considered as conditions, but we would maintain the owner occupancy, at least for the public hearing first. You know, in other words, we had that draft already. It's not something new. So it's not like we have to rebuild it. And the only thing that would be added would be if there's anything else that we need to think about as a condition, but I think that you can do that much without a lot of work.
Yeah, we have that. We would have to just drop that into the latest version,
Yeah.
but we can do that. Would you want to be able to waive the owner occupancy by special permit? Because if we just write it in as a requirement, then.
Well, we have a requirement now. It's not waivable now.
Correct, I just wanna be
Yeah.
clear because the rest of it was that you may consider these other things. Do you want to be able to waive it by special permit?
So
Is that problematic?
we just talked about in the size conversation that we don't want a bigger one because we want to keep the size on another unit on the property as reasonably sized. But it's gonna be the same kinds of reasons for having a second unit. So having the owner occupancy, to me, and having all the other requirements takes away from the ability to have an ADU. I mean, we're putting back all of the requirements that are holding people back from doing them in the first place. So, I mean.
Sometimes that's a.
Not if we
No.
move to 1,200 square feet.
No, I'm saying it, right, but if we add this back in for a special permit, that you have to have owner occupancy, that you have to be consistent with the size, shape, materials, all that.
Got it.
It puts back all the onerous things that the state decided to take out. So,
Well, I guess the point is whether we try and maintain what we have in those contexts. That's the policy choice. Councilor Oliver, you go.
I'm persuaded by that comment. There are some that we just went through and said, yeah, this might not make sense either. Let's put it to public hearing. But just adding them back in to maintain, in all cases, kind of negates the conversation. I think
No,
we
no,
just
they're
had.
only in special permit for the bigger units.
Understood.
Well, Counselor, no,
Trying to get my head around this, so, you're agreeing that the owner occupancy requirement is gonna discourage people from creating an ADU, but weren't we just saying that the whole thrust of ADUs, we're worried about people being able to downsize, so that kind of presumes they're gonna be there. So they be the owners of.
well, I tell you what, I'd like to see you do. I would like to at least have you bring back, for the public hearing, the language that you had before, okay? Because I think that the criteria for special permit, we can always add those in as a lesser idea. And that way we'll have that matter, so we'll have the as of right, we'll have as required, we'll have parens 2, which are Counselor Albright's amendments, which, except for the last one. And then for public hearing, and include in the public hearing the idea of having the owner occupancy retained for special permits, okay? And then we'll have a conversation again after the public hearing and talk about what we do with all this. But we'll also have guidance from the law department about severability. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so I entertain a motion to hold the items, both items.
So moved.
So moved.
Yep.
All right, all those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, all right. Okay, we've got two other items before us. Now, the hour is late, Ms. Kyra and I are sensitive to the demands of your time and all of us and our attention. We're going to talk about parking. Is this one we need to talk about tonight, or can we?
No.
So unless there's a groundswell of desire from the committee, my instinct is to entertain a motion to hold on this.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And then we have a reappointment of Ms. Dane to the planning board, and I would like to entertain a motion to approve that. Move approval, Councilor Albright. Any discussion on the motion? This is a reappointment. Ms. Dane is a distinguished member of this body, and we need to keep her around as long as she's willing to play in this sandbox. There she is, by the way. So I don't need to mention. All right. Anyway,
I have a question for her.
yeah, sure.
So, Ms. Dane, you said on some meetings that you think zoning should be done lot by lot, kind of like Swiss cheese.
Mhm.
And can you explain that a little more?
Sure. I've been highly critical actually of the process of going parcel by parcel for zoning, rezoning, because it's a really expensive process. It's unpredictable for property owners. And you know what the process is like, where it goes to a planning board, it goes through public hearings, it can go to city council, it can go to town meeting. You don't know how it's going to end on the other side. It really ends up being a reason that a lot of property owners don't even like undertake the process because it's really daunting. And then when you do, the process like adds a lot of time to development, and through the process, a lot of projects get like negotiated to be smaller and have like the expenses go up. So I've been like very critical of it in my research. I also found that in my survey of zoning across Eastern Massachusetts, it's become like one of the primary ways of permitting multifamily housing is through this parcel by parcel rezoning. And so it's been really like a major driver of why like housing development of multifamily housing is like so expensive. So I've been critical of it, but the reason why I'm actually very supportive of it is that politically zoning districts for multifamily housing in more predictable ways, it's really hard to do. And so the state mandated it through MBTA communities. But what we saw as a result was like very limited district designations for multifamily housing with a pretty minimal like build out potential, not to like solve the housing shortage. So if we're going to say like, ooh, we think that like parcel by parcel zoning isn't good policy and we shouldn't do it, but we don't have an alternative to that, then you're basically saying like we shouldn't be zoning for multifamily housing. And so I'm very supportive, like outside of an alternative to it, like this is a very high level of review for projects. So like we shouldn't then say like, oh, they shouldn't go, like we don't have like a lot of other zoning for multifamily housing. So we shouldn't do parcel by parcel rezoning. So that ends up being like the mechanism. And there have been like tons of wonderful projects all across the region that have been approved through that kind of process. It's an important process, like, and it's a very rigorous process. Like it's expensive and it's long, like I was just saying. So it's not like my like first choice, or I think it's like one of the tools in the toolbox. And I see that it's like across the whole region, you know, like places with professional planning departments are doing it with planning consultants, with, it's not like a rare occurrence. It's like a standard practice all across the region. And Newton is a part of, is also doing that. And it's not something that like gets used all the time. Like, it's not like there are any communities that are like all the time rezoning parcels, because it's such a, like, it's such an expensive and long process. It's not like that many people are like looking to go through it. But I think that when a property owner wants to like engage in that process, then there should be a mechanism for doing that. And what I'm like against is saying like, oh, it's just one parcel, so we shouldn't do it. And like legally, the courts have said that as long as there's like a public interest in rezoning that parcel, that's okay. Like that's a legal thing to do. And that's like the practice. If you look at the zoning maps all across the region, they look like Swiss cheese. And if you're going to say like they shouldn't look like Swiss cheese, the alternative to the Swiss cheese zoning, and I've seen this all across the region too, the alternative to Swiss cheese zoning is all single family. Like any place that allows a lot of multifamily housing to be built, like a place like Beverly or Arlington, like places where there is zoning for multifamily housing, it looks like Swiss cheese.
So,
Disagree with that.
thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Ms. Dane? I think you get the cheese vote anyway.
Okay. Thank you for asking the question. I felt like I didn't have the opportunity to like fully explain that when it came up at another meeting.
Well, listen, you did well. All right. Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain, I think Councilor Albright, you moved to approve. I think you did. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. Dane, I assume that your appointment will be approved. But you never know what happens at the city council. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn. Thank you.